platform is
Yeah, sorry.
no worries.
Please
Right.
go back to the part where you say you fuck with me again.
Okay. Okay, for sure.
Yeah.
Real though, like I fuck with everything you do for sure. Like you're one of those outlets that's pushing the boundaries of what grassroots journalism is. Like I see your outlet as kind of like a syncretic mechanism, definitely that combines a lot of different forms of media, a lot of different forms of grassroots journalism that a lot of different outlets are kind of afraid to kind of touch. Like you blend a lot of you could say you blend like gonzo journalism with kind of vlogging and also grassroots journalism kind of in its pure form as well. So you kind of have like this syncretic model going of journalism, which I think is so badass. And I haven't seen it anywhere really. And I think, just that kind of innovation in grassroots journalism is definitely something that keeps the community evolving. It's definitely something that keeps the grassroots journalism community in this kind of like avant-garde stage. Uh,
Yeah.
it definitely reminds me of like some Hunter S. Thompson type shit, like some gonzo shit where the journalist itself is kind of part of the protagonist, part of the story in itself.
Yeah.
I fuck with that shit so hard, man. I appreciate everything that you're doing for the community, and definitely underrated as fuck. Your entire outlet, your entire platform, man.
Thank you.
Boost that shit as much as possible, because people need to see that shit. It's definitely pushing the boundaries. Definitely like unconventional badassery.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. Oh, yo, thank you.
Feel me?
Um,
I'm
yeah.
looking like a fucking Neanderthal today, bro.
I'm looking like a Homo sapien.
You look epic, bro. You look epic. I'm over here in my like pure Neanderthal form, bro. Like I should just slink into a cave right now, bro. I should go back to the Caucasus real quick.
Yeah. Not feel you. I'm not feel you. Now we all have our Neanderthal days for sure. But yeah, man, yo, thank you so much for what you said and everything. I never really had a person kind of like tell me what's up, like tell me what I'm doing.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. It's great to chat with you for the first time, bro. It's dope. It's what's up. I've been looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're like like what we're trying to do with the channel too is like just like make sure that the music is kind of like reflective also of like the journalism itself and everything like that. And definitely to like give context to it like in a way where it's like I haven't lived most of these stories. Like when you talk about things like the drug war, like the only side I would have on that is like the side of a consumer, like smoking weed and then doing coke with my friends at one time and then doing that molly that one time. And so that's like I'm on the consumer and like the very like light recreational consumer type end of that, but still part of that in that way. And everything. And so it's interesting when like you bring in like the artists like who like because I guess unfortunately, but also kind of whatever like traditionally like rappers sold drugs, right? Like traditionally it was like a thing for rappers to do to like I guess they actually almost passed time, but like eventually like became a thing on its own for them to like so that they can like not do that really, not risk themselves. But and then that's if they want to, right? It's always a choice. There's plenty of rappers that just do that and also sell drugs, but like that's like the traditional like in everybody's head what everybody knows about a rapper, like that's what they know, right? But always trying to make sure that like those voices are actually there. So when you have like outlets like Narcotic Void or even like Popular Front or stuff like Reporting on Crime, things like that. And then you have like rappers like anyone from like Pape to Summers to a Rookie or anything like that. Like people who like do like have been involved in that like at one point or another. Then you can actually see like, okay, this is a drug dealer. This is like what they think. This is what they are, and like is being a drug dealer such a bad thing after that,
Yeah.
or like it like humanizes the whole issue. So it's like you understand that like these guys are unsavory people, like they might steal your credit card information when you're not looking, but at the same time they'd also like give you a hug and sell you a gram or whatever, or maybe not, you know what I mean? Like it depends on them, how they feel. But
I think that's one of the big kind of themes of grassroots journalism in general. It's the humanization aspect for sure, like and that's definitely one of the things that kind of makes grassroots journalism distinct from mainstream journalism, like CNN, BBC, Fox News. None of that shit is humanization. None of that shit is coming from the human perspective. That shit is coming from lucrativity perspective. That shit is coming from the state perspective. That shit is coming from the party perspective,
like for profitability.
And like meanwhile us grassroots journalists, like we don't do this shit for for profit. We don't do this shit for clout. You know, we do this shit to have a better understanding of humanity, you know, and we want to spread that understanding of humanity, you know, across society to the fullest extent that we can. And, you know, a lot of people just kind of feel confined to mainstream media as kind of like the sole channel of information that exists. And that's just not the case. You know, like Noam Chomsky is somebody who did a lot of good kind of research and theory on media in general, right? He coined this term called like the sphere of consensus, which essentially is this idea that mainstream media operates based on consensus of the ruling class. It operates based on the consensus of what is deemed legitimate, what is deemed a norm by the ruling classes, by the party, or what have you, right? And obviously, like that stems from the duopoly, the two-party system of the U.S. in general, right? Particularly in the U.S. and also across the West, you have kind of this consensus of ruling classes that they need to have this kind of, they need to have certain discussions about certain things, and that's the only thing that you can have discussions about, right?
Yeah.
Definitely, what distinguishes us as grassroots journalists is the fact
definitely
that
a thing to talk about, because like really I found the mainstream media, their main thing is or like the main guiding force of its steering force really is like the talking points of a like upper middle class home. You know what I mean? So like, you know, people are talking about COVID, and people are talking about like the school shooting, and people are talking about like, you know, this thing that happened in this country or coup or whatever.
Yeah.
Then like that's all that really gets shown. And then like unfortunately, like, you know, most people are not upper middle class. Most people are like, you know, working class, lower class, or just straight up poor. Like most people live in like those kind of bungalow type like homes and stuff, and have like a regular job and can afford like this much groceries, spend like, you know, $200 on groceries like in the month and for like every couple weeks. And you know, and that's if they have a family, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I spend like maybe like $30 on groceries as like a single person that's like in that class. But you know what I mean? So like it's like they'll get all their news from that. And then like, you know, a person who like is actually quite broke or something, and maybe like, you know, or like has like debts or is in like this situation, or like, you know, maybe lives in a place where there isn't like, where it's like maybe like polluted, or there's some like clean water or something like that, is all of a sudden like worried more about getting a vaccine passport when it's like literally the most easiest thing to get, or like getting a vaccination when it's the easiest thing to get. Like you go here, wait 5 seconds, you have all your vaccines. That's it. Like you don't even need to talk about it after that.
Yeah, 1000%.
You know what I mean? So it's like there's, you know, so like things like that, because like that's what I've noticed. Like when I turn on the news, like I've only seen and I've been watching like West New York news as well, and comparing it to like, you know, the Canadian coverage and stuff like that, and it's almost nearly identical. It's just like unless like a thing happens in the city, like, you know, a car crash or something like that, it literally is like COVID, that new school shooting, and just like kind of things that are like kind of objectively useless to the everyday person. And one thing I really try to change in everything, like with my channel, is making it useful to everyday people. Like you can like read away TV and walk away with a thing that would actually like help you in your daily life. You know,
You've done such a bomb ass job at doing that, like for sure. And like just talking about audiences, you know, like that's definitely an important concept when it comes to journalism in general and media. Obviously, like the mainstream relies on that upper middle class elite support, right? Because that's how they make money. That's where their stream of income and revenue comes from, right?
but that's who works there. If you think about it, like if you look at a person like Don Lemon, does that guy look like he comes from Brooklyn? Like no.
Like
You know what I mean? Like
it relies on this academic class that's really inaccessible to the general population, right? And when we talk about audiences, you know,
and I feel like almost made inaccessible also, like not normally inaccessible and stuff, like because that knowledge is there, and the capacity, like a person has a capacity, doesn't matter what like class they are.
tries to make the elite perspective accessible to the general population in a way that kind of indoctrinates the general population, right? That's kind of the purpose of CNN, Fox News, even Breitbart, even kind of like these fringe sources as well, even MSNBC to an extent, right?
MSNBC totally, but just for the Democrats, like because I found like Fox is like, you know, like for like conservative and like I honestly I won't say hard right, but just right wing in general. Like if you're like I'm a capitalist, free markets, I'm going to start a business selling like toenail clippers. Like there's just a lot of people like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like and then if like a guy's like, oh, I'm socialist, you know, I want to like go volunteer at a community kitchen or something like that and feed like, you know, most people. then they'll like look at that person, act like they're kind of like stupid, but like it's like in reality, it's like you're starting a toenail crypto business to like feed yourself, like you're the idiot. You know what I mean? but
Looking at
but yeah,
audiences still, like it's not even just class. Like you look at class, you look at where the stream of revenue comes from, flowing into mainstream media. It's the revenue of the upper middle class. It's the revenue of the elite, essentially. It's the elite classes, the academic classes. And at the end of the day, what is the majority population within those classes? It's white people. It's the
yeah,
Judeo-Christian crowd. It's generally the people who subscribe to the American power structures, the Western power structures, right? The people who are part of that ethnic hegemony, it's white people. These mainstream platforms are definitely trying to appeal to white people, and on top of that, very privileged white people who are not part of the economic underclass. Of course, you have working class white people all over the place who are poor, who are part of the underclass. But mainstream media particularly appeals to the upper classes because that's where the revenue comes from, and obviously, that's part of the entire problem right there. That's a huge pillar of the entire problem.
And the scariest thing too, I think, the funniest thing too, I think, definitely on that point was saying like, like the upper middle class is like the main demographic is like, I think almost most of those problems could be solved if like CNN had like a man on the street type team that would just every time there's an issue, like for instance, this last school shooting with the guys at the bottom of a gun and all that, like if they just like literally went to, like they're in New York, dude, or they're in Atlanta, dude, they could just literally if they went to just even like the main square or something in downtown and just had their camera and just start talking to random people. Like they don't always do that, but they should always do that. Like every time there's this issue, so they can get regular opinions. But the only issue is that it's CNN, so a person might want to dress up their opinion and make it more like conform because like we've been so like it's almost like so in that feedback loop where it's like it's like they just want to conform their opinion to kind of like that until they look kind of cool on TV and blah blah blah. But like that's where you find like more grassroots. Like that's where I think where we come in because like when we do stuff like that, like when I was doing that in London, I got like very, very honest answers. Nobody was snide with me. Nobody was like, yeah, this isn't really a thing to talk about. Like I got like I talked to like maybe like approached like maybe 10 people and talked to like 8 of them. You know what I mean? And it was the answers I got were really interesting. Everything from like, well, we'll see how it plays out, like with Brexit and to that to everything to like a random like a Pakistani dude being like, yo, Boris Johnson needs a haircut, like LOL, to like to like a dude in Brixton like giving me like a really good like economic analysis, just talking about like, well, just based on supply and demand, like like that might screw things, blah blah blah. Like like obviously reducing like what he said, but
Yeah.
like like supply and demand, like based on that, like like things might considering that we're not like a major England's not necessarily a major producer of goods, like that we would like like produce a lot of like farm goods and stuff like that, so we'd be good on that. But like for like clothes and textile and oil and this and that, like that's where we would like like sort of have like issues with like Europe and blah blah. And and it was really it was really interesting. I won't say it's
Yeah.
really interesting, but it really shows like that not in every population and not in every place, but like for instance, like places like London, Toronto, you're in San Francisco, um, like well, Oakland, sorry, in San Francisco, but like there's like enough like people always like doubt like the average person's like ability like or education or like knowledge, like awareness, basically always doubt their awareness of the situation, and it's like the average person's quite aware.
For
You know what
sure.
I mean? Like, they may not have like a very developed analysis, but it can be developed with the right information. So like the average person is
Absolutely.
quite aware of what's going on, of what aware. So
Yeah, and that's precisely where grassroots journalism comes in that picture.
and I think this like mainstream journalism has people in a situation where like it's so intimidating because like the logos are so nice, like big
Yeah,
studio.
it's
You
all
see
part of
this
the
guy
spectrum.
come through like in diapers. Like I've seen Don Lemon since I was a child, right? Like I've seen Don
All
Lemon
part of
since
the
I was
spectrum.
like 3 or 4 years old on the TV. It just like
100%.
seems like an immovable object. Like you can't like move a you can't move a CNN anchor, you can't move an MSNBC anchor. Like it's just like that those institutions are just there, like school and the church. But
It's all part of that
um
appeal. It's part of
yeah,
that commodification of knowledge. That's what mainstream media tries to do. They try to commodify information. They try to commodify it so that it becomes.
exactly. And then it's inaccessible. And then people feel like, oh my God, I feel like I almost need to pay to know that. Like if I had like $50, I'd be allowed to know that, but I don't have $50 on me, I'm not allowed to know that. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that's basically how it kind of like that's what I've unfortunately seen in people. I've seen it just like lower their intellectual self-esteem to the point where it's like
yeah.
you know, it's like really damaging on the average person, actually, just mainstream news just being what it is.
Yeah, and it ties directly into academia as well in terms of like accessibility, right? Because you go on all these like research platforms, like half the articles you have to pay like hundreds of fucking dollars for and shit, and like all these like wealthy ass professors and shit. Like it definitely ties into academia, you know, like the mainstream media model very much so follows this kind of academic apartheid model where you know only the people who can afford that information have access to it, you know, and it's definitely exclusionary toward the vast majority of the public, you know, the general population. And in regards to audiences, again, like grassroots journalism is, you know, our audiences are not fixed. They're not static to one population. Whereas mainstream media is very obviously fixed to the populations that bring them that revenue, right? And once you kind of bust that kind of appeal to lucrativity, once you bust that appeal to profit, information and knowledge and really enlightenment in general is free to just go wherever the hell it wants. It's a free river across the world. It's a free channel, you know, enlightenment, just higher knowledge of humanity, empathy, you know, and all of that leads to empathy, you know, greater appreciation for people's struggles, you know, greater things of that nature. Whereas again, going back to mainstream media, it relies on conflict as well for profit. You know, you look at people like Tucker Carlson, pieces of shit like Tucker Carlson, who rely on conflict to essentially bring revenue to Fox News and these huge outlets.
Exactly. Like I've never seen a Tucker Carlson episode where he's not like, tonight there are foreign tissue paper destroying the local tissue paper industry. Like, you know what I mean? Like anything. Like Tucker Carlson can talk about a McDonald's meal without like comparing it to a McDonald's meal in another town, and then like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Or just saying that things in that tone. It's very combative. Like I understand what you mean. It's a very combative way to kind of to like do the news, and then that would lock a person, like either that would draw in a lot of angry people and like lock people in that anger, and then thinking like, okay, being angry when I process information is like efficient or just a good thing. Is like just, you know, like a good thing in general, which is not. Like if you're really angry and processing info, you're gonna process it differently.
Exactly.
Like you're gonna interpret a guy riding his bike as like just, I'm using a lot of examples, sorry, but like, you know, like normally a guy riding his bike is just him riding his bike, but you might interpret that guy riding his bike as him saying like fuck you to all the cars. You know what I mean? Like it depends on how you're thinking.
Exactly.
You know
It goes to that pathos, you know, that emotional response. And at the end of the day, that all revolves around the spectacle that is mainstream media, you know, and it's how they commodify that thing, you know, like they want to sell you that information. It's how they commodify that information into this package deal that, you know, you're going to get an emotional response out of this. You can perceive this information in a way that is convenient for your own emotions, convenient for your own pathos, right? And that's part of the mainstream media model. It's part of this lucrativity. It's part of this entire spectacle that is the entirety of mainstream media. And the spectacle is exactly how they make revenue, right? They make it off of, you know, these upper classes, but at the same time, when they want to profit off of, you know, the lower classes, when they want to profit off of the working class, for instance, they try to pit the working class against other populations of the working class, right? And that's how they also make revenue, right? That's kind of how they make a channel of revenue as well, right? Contention.
Kept society together even.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I'm thankful that grassroots journalism exists, and you know, I think the world would be a really much more shitty place without grassroots journalism right now, especially in the era of late stage capitalism, you know, and people, you know, really a lot of the time, people's kind of understanding of the world it comes entirely from their channels of information. You know, a lot of people have certain channels of information that might feed their emotional responses. It might feed their hatred for one group or another, right? Whereas grassroots journalism, we're not connected to any lucrativity. We're not connected to any profit. We're not connected to any clout. We're not connected to any spectacle in generally, right? So that removes us from all the major flaws that mainstream media relies on as its major pillars, right? And it makes me proud to be a grassroots journalist, because we're the ones who are spreading completely pure information. We're the ones who are spreading information that is not contaminated by profit. It's not contaminated by an interest group. It's not contaminated by contention. You know, it's not our it's not our
Yeah, we
goal
don't,
to
the
create.
nice thing is we don't even have that thing where a lot of journalists, especially I would say maybe back in the early like newspaper era and stuff like that, where everybody's trying to get the story and everything like before everyone else. We don't even really have a lot of that going on, especially like in our and I would say especially in our community. It's just like, if you know this and you know this, if you have that video, then you're supposed to have video, and it's actually like a lot more um I'd say collective, like a lot more like communal
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything, because like there are like it's and that's really helped us like that, like our sphere, right, and everything the grassroots journalism sphere in general, because
it's definitely
yeah, like
community, it's definitely a community, and it's, a lot of it is based on mutual aid as well. And I think that's definitely something me and you have been doing in particular. It's one of our goals to lift up the community. It's not just for ourselves. Like we're not hyper individualized. We're not these journalists who are trying to become micro celebrities. Like there are a few people out there, whether grassroots or mainstream journalists, who are just in it to become kind of micro celebrities and so on and so forth. But it's really important that a lot of these outlets are doing it for the community, doing it for mutual aid, to help people, and not just our community in particular, but the international front in general, liberation movements, people who are marginalized across the world. It's so damn important for us to, as kind of these beacons of information, of worldwide information, of global information. It's important that we use kind of our platforms as a platform for mutual aid as well, not just information, a platform. And I always tell people,
exactly how people.
yeah, and I always tell people mutual aid it's not just a material process, it's also a psychological process. That means being here psychologically for one another, being here, if somebody's going through a shitty time, we need to lift each other up. If somebody's going through some sort of family crisis or individual crisis, it shouldn't just be on them to just figure their own shit out. If we promote the idea of humanity, we need to.
And I mean, it's actually basically unnatural. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, human beings are like, I didn't like human beings are social animals. Like, that's like have to start that. But it's like literally everybody is born with a mother and a dad. Like, you
Absolutely.
come into this world with two people behind you. Absolutely. And there's not even really an unless. Like, every single person living comes in this world via two people. And whether those two people stick by you your whole life, or for part of your life, or for any part of your life, like, they're not the only two people, then everybody has friends, everybody has family, everybody has coworkers, everybody has colleagues, every single person alive today. And everything. So that, like, that's why the concept of like individualism in that way, where it's just like or I don't even really know what to say. It's not really individualism really, but it's just like this neoliberal attitude that we have like last like 10 years, where like everybody's all of a sudden supposed to like be completely set up by themselves without like any like without any help, is like literally an impossibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
That's
it's not really like, it's kind of like for instance, I don't have $20, I don't have a job, and like that's it. It's like, how am I getting $20? Like, like unless I like take it from another person, you know what I mean? Like, then you can't really have it, and then that's not really an option, really. If you're thinking in that mindset of mutual aid, where it's just like, oh, I want to be in a community that's safe enough that I could just give people things. I don't want to be in a community where I have to worry about my stuff being stolen or being hurt for it.
Absolutely.
You know what I
Absolutely.
mean? So
That's definitely a mechanism that the neoliberal modernity profits off of, and that's something that kind of reinforces its strength. The capitalist modernity, so to speak. Although we're definitely more so in the neoliberal modernity right now, where things are, we're in an era of late stage capitalism right now, which is distinguished from earlier eras of capitalism, where the factory system is not. It's not a fresh idea. It's not something that's just been planted within the last decade or so. Uh,
actually, this is like the basic blueprint, because I feel like most like places, and anything that's kind of like a starter place, like your McDonald's, your middle school, like your things like that, very much like have like a factory mindset to raise you for like prepare you for a factory mindset. Like, you can count enough, just to count enough, like just to count enough products that are on the line when you're like assembling them, or to count enough pieces in like a thing you're making, or like you can read like the labels on the stuff. Like, they basically, that's the amount of like education that they can basically teach you, but they do teach you a little bit more, usually, especially if you go to high school and take different classes and get different grades and blah blah blah. But at least here, I don't know. But then again, like, So it's like then again, the funny thing too is that I want to say it's like just like I'm talking from Canada and like act like that's universal, but like every other country has kind of developed or like progressed with like the whole like fact like the whole like capitalism, like industrial, like the industrialized capitalism thing,
Mhm.
like at their own pace and also even like in a different direction. So you know what I mean? So like you have like America that's decided to do the very corporate, heavily corporate capitalism where they rely on like, the actual businesses and like
Yeah.
to kind of like just do the country basically and just like live the country, if that makes sense. Like, like you rely on like pharmaceutical businesses. So like individual, like either an individual or a couple of friends like starting out like a pharmacy business based on their education from wherever. And then like, if those guys aren't there, then you don't get healthcare basically, like, but then there's like places like, like where I'm at, or like, Cuba, or like, France, or England, or wherever, where it's like, that's like already a part of a government service. So like, the people setting up the country said like, okay, people will need like medicine, and like we'll do it that way. We're like, we will provide the medicine. And in America decided to do it where it's just like, okay, well, we'll get like some of our like, oh, they would want to say what will be said is like we'll get our best guys to provide the medicine, but like in reality it's just like whoever is like rich enough and like
Yeah.
it might and connected enough to kind of like start a company, like if they have like the supplies for like that sort of thing, which
Yeah.
can which can mess up with the
That's
quality too, because like you can get like a very consistent quality from like a government healthcare, and then like with like non-government healthcare you get very inconsistent quality, but like that's also a good thing. You might get to like go to like the cancer research place that like has like the experimental drug that saves your life versus the one that's like down the road that might not, but then there's a cost difference, right? So then you kind of get put in a situation where you live in a country where only the rich can really survive. Like only the rich can really heal themselves if they get sick. Only the rich can really like bail themselves out of jail if they commit a crime they didn't commit, or like or even if commit a crime that they did commit. You know what I mean? So then that like we're not even on the legal system, but that totally screws things up. Where like a person can literally like murder a person, be fully guilty of it, and just like walk out the next day and like not really go to jail unless they're convicted.
yeah.
And even if like post bond after a certain amount of time. So like that even like begs the question, like in a capitalist society, are things like murder, arson, theft, blah 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 even illegal? And
Yeah.
I like, and that just like totally turns society on its head basically.
Yeah.
Like because you're getting sold one thing on paper and you're being told one thing on paper, but then when you get outside in the world it's like mostly the same, unless you basically like bump into the wrong person, walk into the wrong alley, and then all of a sudden it's completely different and you have to like relearn life like that, like most people. So
Yeah. It's important for people to understand that anything that is profit driven, anything that relies on capital is going to put capital before humans. Anything that's profit driven is going to, whether it starts off or it eventually becomes, just this capitalist mechanism, it is always going to gravitate in the direction of putting capital first before humans. And you see that everywhere. Across the nation state system, and every nation state that has adopted some form of a capitalist model, whether it's state capitalism in China or neoliberal capitalism as we see in the US, there's always going to be a gradual gravitation toward putting profit before humanity in
yeah.
every single case where there is a profit driven mechanism.
I think the misconception is that they think that because we like on our side of like the like fence on in the world where like we literally say like profits for people, but I think that they're like from their perspective, like I'm starting to like this interacting with these like personalities that like literally value money over human lives. I'm starting to realize that they kind of feel that like money is for people and like for human life, so it's like but not for your human life or not for their human life, so like that just screws up the whole thing where you're like, okay,
It's
well
it's
where
selective.
like which human life is worth the amount of money that it takes to survive, and
Exactly.
why is that a question to ask? Why is that a discrepancy? Like isn't the whole point of making any economic system as human beings to make life like like better to live? I would say easier to live because I would hurt like some people would like kind of combust at the idea of the word easy,
Mhm.
but like just make it like more efficient to live. Like the only reason why a printing press exists is to make books faster. The only reason why like any food is like made in a factory or processed in a factory at all is to make it like faster to like distribute to more people.
Mhm.
Otherwise there is no point, you know what I mean? Like if the people don't eat food, then there is no point to making food. You know what I mean? Like It's one of those. So
Yeah,
um
capital.
that's why I think capitalism actually as a thing like literally does not make sense. Like it's literally like the idea of like give me 5 rocks and I'll give you a loaf of bread. Like what the hell am I gonna do with those 5 rocks? Like, you know, I
Capital.
might be able to make stone tools, but like if it's the Iron Age, then what's the point?
It's important for people, especially in the era of late stage capitalism, to realize that capital is always concentrated in the power structures of whatever society you're looking at, right? There's always going to be a hegemonic structure in place which makes the most out of that capitalist mechanism, whereas all the other classes are becoming marginalized, right? You see that in the nation state system, and that goes back to the idea that the nation state itself, the state itself, is really just a shell of capitalism. You know, no matter if you have a nominally state or a nominally classless state, it's always going to gravitate toward capitalism at one point or another, because the state itself functions as a shell of capital. It functions as a mechanism where the power structures in place are only going to be fed more and more and more power as late stage capitalism progresses.
Well, yeah,
Right?
because the whole point of nationalism really is to like I guess like lay out ideals that they would want in a society, but then like also like the people that pertain to those ideals the most, even in a classless society, like America is like relatively classless considering. Like, you know, like those would be the people kind of favored by the state and favored by anyone who's in a position of authority. And I think authority really is like the main thing that we need to get rid of in power, because that's what's really driving the whole thing. The idea of like a person actually be the idea of a person being over another person and being able to like make their authority like command their authority top down like that is like really the problem with humanity in general. Because a person saying like it used to be like a person saying like you don't get food, basically like you can't eat, you know, and then that person like having to do whatever they have to do to eat, which is how capitalism functions. It's like if you don't like, you know, want to like behave in school, if you don't like what we teach in school, and you know you don't get like the job that you're supposed to get, like it doesn't have to even start that early, but it could even like be like you did everything right, and then like, you know, you get into the work world and it's just hard to find a job, like a real job, blah blah blah, blah. But basically if you don't work, you don't eat, then you die, right?
Yeah.
Like very clear cut, no, like no way to bend that. You know, like so any system I think that even functions off of that, where like starvation is like not like a consequence but almost like an inevitability, because like the way that the economy is working and the way that things are going, a lot of people are going to experience things like that, you know, like not every other person, but I'm very sure that every single person has like, you know, talk to anybody who's like 30, 40, they definitely have had at least like 1 week or a weekend where they haven't been able to eat the way they usually do, you know, if at all, like, you know what I mean? Like in college, I've literally had a couple of days where like I just was not able, like I could not eat, like I did not have the money to eat. Like I maybe had like some water crackers that my grandma like sent me or something, and I just had to like, you know, like eat those or whatever. But it's like it's one of those things where like honestly, like that whole idea in and itself is not only cruel but like inefficient and completely unnecessary. Like if there's enough food in the world, which there is, to feed everybody, if there's 7 billion people, then there needs to be like 7 billion pieces of food every day. You know what I mean? Like then that, like, you know, that should just be distributed. Like, you know, the funny thing is too is like when we have like hegemonic like hegemons like you know like Russia, like America, like, you know, China, like they say China's on its way to becoming a hegemon. I'm pretty sure China is a hegemon considering it produces like the majority of the world's like objects.
It's already a hegemon for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a hegemon that like it can say like I'm not a hegemon. You know what I mean? Like, you know,
Like, you know, the US is actually the real hegemon, but we're like,
yeah, it's just like, yeah, you know, it's really like the vice president and the president. There's just like the principal and vice principal. It's like, you don't need to speak to the principal.
we're gonna
in the US.
blame everything on the US because the US just has just enough power for us to blame everything on the US, whereas we're gonna become the real hegemon real quick, you know.
That's
But yeah,
but like, but then again, I do kind of lack on one major thing is that the U.S. does have like its military capability, and not just like the military, like the technology is like is very good. Like they have the best, some of the best military technology I'd say in the world, not for small arms, but for like for actually no, for small arms, because the M4 is still like one of the best rifles in the world, you know. But like for their small arms technology, and especially any sort of radar or air technology, like with the United States with their air force is like fucking insane. Like they basically invented the drone. Like, you know what I mean? Like that revolutionary piece of equipment. So like
Really
And then
ties to,
and then with like the oh, sorry, with like the military bases all over the world, like in every single corner of the world, it can be anywhere in the world. So like I feel like that's basically what's kind of holding the US together, but then they're kind of lacking on the economic side. So like, China can pretty much come and blindside them and make it so that they can't really afford to run any of those military bases. And like, like if like, that they might have to close down, but that's only if like we agree that money is still a thing, like capitalism is still a thing. Like the funniest thing is that America, like if it switches to like some sort of like moneyless technocracy type society where like there's like just like a rations and like I don't say rations or whatever, but like there's just like there's a grocery store, there's no cash register, you don't have to pay for anything. It's just like only take 5 boxes of pancake mix or something. Don't take like 50 because like people will need it. And like there's just like a sign there, just like there's a sign for like COVID, this and that. Like the United States will be able to do whatever it wants forever. Like not even joking. Everybody can eat. There wouldn't be a point in even like committing most crimes unless you just want to go to like nice hotels all the time or something. Like there wouldn't even be an issue because if everybody can eat, everybody can like housing was free and it's not like basic shitty housing, but like you can literally make the condos like across from you free because half of those are empty. You know what I mean? Like it's like and you could literally just give everyone a condo. Like the funny thing is like, and I'm also speaking mostly from a Canadian mindset. So from an American mindset, like you say, like you can give everybody a condo if that's possible. Americans are going to be like, that's awesome. Like yeah, like even the French will be like, yeah, but maybe what's the catch, right? Like that's something that, like the French might ask, but the French would definitely be like, yeah. The UK would be like, I don't know, and then Canadians will be like, well, why does everyone deserve a condo?
yeah.
And then it becomes like a weird self-esteem issue, like whether you deserve to be alive or not. Like, I don't really think I'm that good, so I shouldn't be alive. Like it like countries like that's I think that's also why like my country kind of struggles to function in like a normal way. There's a lot of like shadowy type of entities that control very basic government services that shouldn't, just because like they're not really like I would just say straight up, like not just because like quite frankly they haven't been doing that good of a job. Like things don't really run that well. Like things like fall apart. Blah blah
It's
blah.
all part of the neoliberal
Uh,
sphere, every nation
exactly.
state in the West. And also just going back to kind of the bipolarity between the US and China, is
Yeah.
definitely evident that the US runs very much so a militarist imperialist model with its military, right? Meaning that the US's imperialism is very overt and it kind of relies on NATO as well. NATO and the US are kind of,
And it's very feel good imperialism. Like if you're like
yeah, like it riles up that nationalist spirit,
it's easy to get swept. It's easy to get swept up in it because I honestly I was just posting a few American flags, like just like or I was just posting whatever like on Instagram. My last post before my account got hacked, and I kind of had that struggle and accidentally got locked out like myself out because I didn't have my backup codes. Um, like I like dead ass. I post like like a subbers video with an American flag, just be like, this is like the American rapper, like this is like the like unfortunately I think like the lifestyle that a lot of people in America like kind of would like live and stuff if like there were certain rules. Like I'm not really sure how to say it, but it's
yeah,
very much like I want to say that that group of of rappers like Slay World, like KK and Summers, Goody, like they're very like classic American outlaws. Like that might offend like your white biker type of guys or like other like criminals, but the very classic American like outlaws like in that sort of way. And
yeah.
that's a funny thing about America is like they value their outlaws like almost as much as our law enforcement. So like it's not like breaking the rules in America isn't even seen as breaking the rules if the rules are actually bad. You know what I mean? Like that's
When they're white, right? So you got like a lot of police status will look up to Jesse James and shit and be like, oh, this was a valid example of somebody
yeah.
fighting tyranny, and we're gonna kill all the libtards and
Yeah. But people even look at like Bonnie and Clyde and be like, "Wow, like look at those guys." And it's like they just rob banks. They didn't even do it like that one what's his name? Something Derringer did. Like there was like a bank robber that would burn all of the debts or whatever. Like he would go like when he did a bank robbery, he would go into the records and like destroy all the records so that anybody who was in any debts, any mortgage, anything would be completely free of debts.
yeah,
Like
that's
they don't even giving shit back by doing that, Like even modern bank robbers can like blow up a server room if they want. Like you know what I mean? And just like free events out of like some OSAP debt or whatever. But
yeah. That nationalist spirit that kind of comes along with this like kind of
yeah.
not really accurate idea of fighting tyranny. It's like
Or
it
actually what
reinforces
tyranny even is,
tyrannical
where it comes
structure.
from.
And that contrast, like going back to the China US model, I think it's important. Like China as kind of on the contrast to US nationalism, US imperialism, China very much so relies on this Belt and Road economic model of nationalism and imperialism. That's how kind of Chinese imperialism is driven across the world to become this unipolar hegemon, so to speak, right? And that's how it kind of wants to replace the U.S. by answering U.S. militarist imperialism, which is far more overt. It wants to answer this overt U.S. imperialism with a far more covert, kind of far more subtle form of imperialism, which relies on kind of distributing norms and distributing economic kind of implants across the world, right? And that's how China kind of grasps its power, kind of like an octopus, an economic octopus across every continent, right? Particularly in the global south. It wants to take advantage of the global south to kind of spread its tentacles all over the place, where the US has maybe emphasized its militarist overt presence in a different part, right? It's not to say that US imperialism is strictly militarist. Of course, it relies on that economic model to spread neoliberalism as well. But of course, China does not rely on its military to spread its own economic imperialism, right? It relies on.
One thing I kind of noticed too is like, yeah, oh, sorry to interrupt. But yeah,
No,
one thing I definitely noticed too with China is that they the US, and they definitely took a page out of the like European colonist book with that. They really like to like mess around with like people's governments. Like if they know that they have enough like soft power or hard power to like mess with the government or install a dictator or take out a dictator or do whatever, they kind of do that. So like there's a lot, like they have a lot of like political power and a lot of like political like prowess. Like, they're very good like political fighters, you know, because they can
absolutely.
like, you know, just their way of life, like, you know, living in America or looking at America's kind of
Under the guise of the
like
road,
by
like
them,
they do it so
yeah,
like
like
they're
by
just
them.
experts at it. They're experts at kind of installing this kind of very subtle form of imperialism that's kind of driven by the Belt and Road Initiative, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like
Like they kind of enter a certain nation state under the guise of, you know, we're going to help your economy, we're going to provide jobs, and eventually it just completely takes over the local markets, and it makes the entirety of the local market basically starved. Whereas at the end of the day, you have the CCP basically in charge of everything, you know, and it's all driven by this guise of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's all driven by this guise of we're going to improve infrastructure, we're going to improve, you know, this local economy. Whereas it literally just drives out all the local markets, it drives out all the local jobs, and in a sense, that's even like it's just as bad in imperialism as US imperialism,
yeah.
because it does almost.
But you know, I would beg to differ just in that one part, because like what I was going to say is that like I find that like America, they kind of weaponize their culture and weaponize their media industry in a way where it's like kind of like a Roman thing almost, where it's like
Weaponized for sure.
their culture is like very dominant. So like if anywhere in the world, you kind of like everybody in the world kind of knows what American culture is and stuff, and like interacts with it in a
Absolutely.
certain way. You know what I mean? And like, you know, once you find American culture, like you're like, even if you've never interacted with it, you're just like, whoa, like this is new. Like I need to know what this is, like almost immediately.
Yeah,
You
and
know
a
what I
lot of
mean?
that,
You
a
know what
lot
I
of
mean?
the American culture being
So I
distributed
find,
across the world is from post World War II, kind of like the
yeah.
Marshall Plan, right? Like in the
So
wake of World War II, you have kind of this US economic hegemony over Europe. And as a result of that, you have European dependency on the US after that. And essentially the entire Western sphere is centered in the US ever since the Marshall Plan, essentially in 1945, right? Where you have the US basically distributing its aid across Europe and basically pulling the entire continent into its dependency, right? And
yeah,
basically colonizing Europe in its own way. And that's essentially where this kind
especially
of
militarily, like not so much culturally. And that's what I want to get to, is that America does a lot of like cultural colonization in a way where
absolutely,
like
yeah,
like in that way. So like that's helped them like do things like, for instance, um like I think that like there's like a lot of like great examples I think of that. But yeah, that's what I think is like their main thing, because like just the whole thing where like it's kind of like a running joke that like, oh, is America gonna like replace that left-leaning you know, candidate in like, you know, in Argentina or something, like, you know, like you know, like it's just like a thing. You know what I mean? And like I found like that's like the main way that they do that, is like everybody kind of like knows America, knows what it is, and like that's how you even get like a pro-America candidate or like a pro-democracy candidate, is what they usually say. Like
far
a
more
pro,
based on the spectacle. You know, it's definitely it's like a weaponized spectacle in a sense, whereas Chinese imperialism does not rely on a spectacle, it relies on subtlety, you know.
yeah.
And it's definitely it's
China's interesting too, because like they'll just like the way I think, and I'm leading up to a point. Sorry, I'm taking so long.
no,
But
you're
like
good.
I'm leading up to a point where I'm basically saying like I think that the like because America has like done so much with like, you know, culture, kind of enforcing their culture on people, kind of being like you know, like just, you know, not being able to even sell you the technology without the culture. Like, you know, if you want our technology, you're gonna have to have our culture and our values. If you want a military technology or a military intervention, you're gonna have to deal with us building like our schools and doing our things there, which aren't necessary. And I only say not necessary because everybody has a school system, everybody has a healthcare system, everybody already has that. that's already there. So, to kind of like go there and destroy like the local healthcare system, like, the local cultural system and everything like that. And then put people in a situation like 20, 30 years down the road where like, they have another problem. And then it's basically like, oh, do I pick the US or do I pick, well, at least do I pick the US or do I pick Russia? But now like, do I pick the US or do I pick China? And still Russia in certain parts. Like if you're in like Europe or whatever, even the Middle East, it's still like, do I buy BTRs or do I buy, well, fuck, I can't even buy Strikers or Bradleys or or anything or any like those APCs because like I didn't like do this and hop through this hoop and do this jump with the Americans to like you know what I mean, or I don't have enough like money or this or that. You know what I mean, like it kind of depends too, because like the way that Russia like used to sell their things and like distribute their things, it was just like anybody who was opposed to the US, I think at a certain point, like like they just like give them stuff. So like there's like 1 million pounds of old Russian equipment and like not just AKs but like heavy stuff like tanks just like in random people's possessions in certain countries probably.
In terms of the global military industrial complex, you definitely have this tripolarity between Russia, China, and the US, right? And definitely in the wake of the Soviet Union, you have a lot of kind of obsolete weapons and like this huge fucking surplus of Russian Soviet military equipment that the Russian state does not use anymore. So essentially a lot of the Russian military industrial complex, a lot of what it relies on is kind of the sale of all these obsolete Soviet weapons and Soviet military equipment, right?
Exactly. So like I'm saying straight up
to the US in the sense that the US relies on kind of like this novel production model where it wants to produce like say the F-35s, right? It wants to sell F-35s to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. It relies on more of a spectacle, whereas it doesn't rely on something that's already established that Russia kind of relies on. It definitely relies on kind of this constant output of new spectacles and militarized spectacles. And that's how it kind of increases its military imperialism across the world as well, through the military industrial complex and all these new spectacles and new fighter jets and new equipment and so on and so forth. And that definitely plays into the conversation of imperialism in the same sense that and
it would make like a country that isn't involved in imperialism even want to be involved in one of those sides. And I think that's like the unfortunate part about that, because back to the point where it's like US like kind of like usually sells like their imperialism or is able to kind of just like butt in or like nose in when it's like completely almost literally completely illegal by like everybody's standards, to be honest. Like in that way it's kind of just because like those certain aforementioned things. And then when China comes in, is like they'll kind of like I wouldn't say like sell behind, but they'll definitely come in afterwards and like go to a place like Africa that's been like ravaged by Europe, ravaged by America, and is being ravaged by America and Europe, and just be like, well, you don't have to have like an amazing human rights record or never have a civil war in your country, but like I'll still build roads and nuclear power plants and like and do all those stuff that they didn't have to do, but like it's going to be at some insane rate that's going to like screw up your country economically, and then they'll like hit them with the money, like, you know what I mean? And then it'll be like that, and then that's a way of economically colonizing a place. Like even my country, Jamaica, like, there's like a lot of like Chinese contractors or whatever going there. And and I guess like from like the local people's perspectives, like colonizing the country and like in a second way, and even though like Jamaica still like has, even though it's independent, it still has like very close ties to England, but those close ties to England mean that England can do things like build like a jail in America, in Jamaica specifically for deportees. And it's like it's like it can like it's unfortunately it's a situation where in the world where like every country is not really on equal footing, where like London can call Kingston and just say, hey, we're building a jail for deportees, and like Kingston will be like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, and they may not think that, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Or like, and the only place like that's kind of like in between that, like in negotiate things like that, are like countries like Brazil. Like Brazil doesn't have to play ball with everything they say. And Brazil also has like was very smart in actually having its own indigenous weapons industry and its own indigenous military industry. Where like they don't really need to buy guns from anyone.
They don't need to be dependent. Yeah, and that's what autarky is all about, and the whole point about Jamaica was really interesting because that reminded me of kind of Barbados's recent independence from the British Empire. But there's a dilemma that comes along with that, because it's great that Barbados has become fully independent from the British Empire, but at the same time, it's still susceptible to becoming colonized economically by the British Empire, and also just the West in general, right? Being so close to the West, and especially if the people of Barbados were to elect kind of a neoliberal ruling class, or to elect kind kind of a centrist or kind of capitalist populist ruling class is definitely susceptible to that foreign economic intervention and that foreign economic imperialism, and kind of making Barbados a colony once again, but not nominally, but de facto, in the sense that it's economically still dependent on different powers. And that's precisely where—
And ideologically too, like as a Caribbean person, like ideologically, we're very capitalist and unfortunately quite right leaning in certain ways, but like,
Yeah.
you know, and so right leaning that if I was to walk downstairs into a room full of Caribbean people and say like, you know, are people in the Caribbean kind of right? They'd be like, no, we're not. What do you mean we're right? Do you have the authority to say that we're right? But if I was like the right person to them, I could say something like that, and they'd be like, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know, not everywhere works that way. Like, like there's people that say that and like they wouldn't agree with you, but they'd be like, I don't really think so. I mean, like, look at this, look at this, and look at this. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So
Yeah, and all that goes back.
that's a problem too, because I think that's maybe like a direct I won't even say like, oh, that's a result of slavery. Like I don't even think that's necessarily a result of slavery, but it's definitely a result of like enslaved people like kind of like basically just being kind of handed a kind of not really handed a country, but like, you know, being able to like, you know, manage a country, and then like kind of just obviously having it to do it like the way that they think, like, you know, Europe would have done it, or like the way that they think would have done it, and then like kind of do it like, okay, but I'll do it like in my like better way or whatever. You know, like
Yeah, yeah.
you know, you can be people saying like, oh, if like America's really militaristic, then I'm going to be more militaristic in America, but that puts you in a situation where you're fascist. You know, or like, okay, if like England's really rich, I'm going to be richer than England, but like that also puts you in a situation where you probably be fascist, to be honest. Like actually, it absolutely puts you in a position where you'll be fascist. It like basically makes like a bunch of fascist states that are almost like a buffer state to like, you know, or like a fascist, like a cloud of fascist mindsets that might like be right beside very non-fascist mindsets. Because I'm not talking about the whole Caribbean, like, you know, like that's Jamaica for sure. Just being a Jamaican person, not saying that there's no left-leaning Jamaicans, but like generally not. But then you go to Grenada, and then you have like, you know, then you have Maurice Bishop, and you have like a whole communist revolution that America needed to intervene in. So, you know, it's like not everybody in the islands even thinks the same, or is like, it's kind of like that. You get like different things from different wherever.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because, you know, when you have a lot of these nascent states that have just become independent in the wake of colonization, of direct colonization, of militarized colonization, you know, all they have really is relation to other states. All they have really is relation to other nation states and how to govern, how to kind of create tools of governance. And really, at the end of the day, if you just compare your own state model to another nation state, you're probably just going to fall into the same capitalist trap. You're probably just going to fall into the same trap that is dependence on foreign economic intervention, dependence on just foreign aid in general, right? And that's part of where kind of Sankarism, Thomas Sankara is such a great model for the global South in particular, in kind of finding ways to create autarky and self-sufficiency in the wake of post-colonialism, you know, and Thomas Sankara did such a great job of that in Burkina Faso, and just making Burkina Faso self-sufficient and self-dependent in the wake of colonization from France, right? And there's been some similar models like that, which have been really good, like the Zapatistas in Chiapas, right? And also Rojava to the same extent. You look at models like that, and that's where you can definitely find kind of a separation from the neoliberal modernity. You can find kind of this really pure form of economic autarky, self-sufficiency, right? Which is not dependent, or maybe partially dependent, but transitional to its own self-sufficiency, right? Eventually. And you know, it's so important for these nascent states, these nascent independent states, to not look to the Bretton Woods institutions, not look to the World Bank, not look to the IMF for help, for economic aid, because the minute you seek help from the World Bank, the minute you seek help from the Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF, you are going to become dependent on that economic structure for a very long time, and it's going to be very hard to separate your state from that economic grasp of the Western institutions, you know.
Exactly. I think that's I wouldn't even say that's the whole point of that, because obviously the point of like something like the World Bank giving you a loan is so that you can like eventually repay to be self-sufficient, or, you know, or make money off of that loan to like, you know, to repay it and keep some profit. So you're not like, you know, you're not stuck. But
it all depends on the ruling
I
class.
think the way that they kind of give countries loan, especially like, you know, talking about the IMF, like, you know, like the way they even like loan out things, it's almost in a way that where you're like almost not supposed to really pay it back. you know, and just it's just almost like saying like, okay, like you're now like an American colony. It's almost like kind of like the way that they kind of sorry, it's almost like the kind of the way that they kind of like almost ends up playing out. I don't know whether that's actually like on purpose on their part, because like you know like those powers that be like you know sometimes they do things like kind of dastardly to kind of like you know trap everybody or trap this and sometimes they just kind of screw up and like it just kind of ends up becoming that way. You know what I mean? So like I'm not really sure, but like I would just honestly hazard a guess that like the whole point of the IMF is to economically colonize like any country dumb enough to
Absolutely.
like borrow money from it.
It becomes evident, you know, when you look at the IMF and the World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions, they pose as these egalitarian structures. They pose as kind of the spectacle of, you know, we want to help everybody, we want to end starvation, we want to end poverty. But at the end of the day, if you look at the roots, if you look at the roots of the Bretton Woods institutions, if you look at the roots of the IMF and the World Bank, a lot of it was structured in the same meetings that NATO was structured. These were organizations that were founded in the exact same conferences that NATO and other huge Western institutions were founded. They were founded by very similar people in similar circles.
If not the same people, because you know it's probably like because you know like the UN is a job. Like you know I've been there. It's like there are literally people that are there and they're just like, okay, my project for this year is to get this done. My project for this year is to get this done, and they're changing the world. Yeah. So, like one person's project one year could be like I don't know, making like a Peace Corps and just like having peacekeeping being a thing. Like Leslie B. Pearson, who like you know Toronto Airport's named after. And then like you know they're like you know the next like you know another person's project or like you know then their next project you know theoretically not like it literally could be like okay like I'm going to like decolonize the world, which actually was a thing. Like they literally I've been there like in New York where there's actually like a room that like is like a chamber of the UN that's no longer used for most part, where it's just like literally meant for like the decolonization of people. Like there was a point in time like throughout the 60s where everybody would meet there and just kind of like literally just any colonized country would just kind of like just go through a process of decolonizing it. But it's like I think they still need that room. You know what I mean? I think they still need that because there's a lot of places that are economically independent on other places that shouldn't be. And there's a lot of places that are militarily dependent on other places that shouldn't be. You know what I mean? Like so I think that's really a thing because there's places that straight up like I mean I'm trying to think of a good example, but like, you know, like you would think even like Israel, like you would think Israel like has it all handled because of their indigenous weapon industry and this and that, but it's still like the population wise, like you know they still need to like you know that like without like that hammer that sickle of like the U.S. like holding like a hammer over Iran and over like Palestine, you know, waiting to drop like at the moment that it's invaded.
Liberty torch,
like
right?
yeah, literally, but it's like yeah, it's
Pounding the fucking world with the Liberty torch.
Like, boom, boom, boom. Literally, bro. Yeah, like you know, like dual Liberty torches, like boom, boom. It's like what would the IMF, what would the fucking with the military, what would the you know, like a rollout mat of like Liberty torches.
It's a great point that you made in regards to like new independent states that have just become independent from empires. They definitely need kind of economic aid in a lot of different places, but when they accept loans, it depends on the ruling class. Like they can pull a Gaddafi, they can do a Gaddafi and be like, okay, we'll take some of these World Bank loans, but then at the end of the day, we're not going to pay any of this shit back. We're going to use this for our own infrastructure, and then we're going to use this to become more self-sufficient. In theory, you can definitely do that, you know, and you can use IMF loans, you can use World Trade Organization bullshit or World Bank bullshit to kind of create like a autarchical base for your state, right? That's definitely been done before. Unfortunately, in the past, what it's done is it has kind of strengthened the neoliberal bloc within these countries, right?
I feel like you have to like think like Gaddafi in that way, where like you know he's like a Pan-Africanist, and you like really look at the entire West, and it's just like I have to be honest, Gaddafi is like the last person to look at the entire West and just be like, yeah, like fuck all you guys, like we read books and we sleep in beds like everyone else, like I don't care what you guys think, you know, like the guy like, and I say that like that because like unfortunately, like it's just kind of ingrained in society to talk down to any African country. But like you look at most African countries, if you Google most African countries, like you're just not going to see a shithole. You know what I mean? The city might even look better than your city.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like you look at Lagos, like Lagos looks better than Toronto. I'll just say that. Yeah. You know, like not every part of Lagos, but like
more risk of dying in LA and even San Francisco here than fucking probably Bamako, Mali, or any city in Africa, really. Like exactly. That's where you have like that.
And I feel like the people there wouldn't want to say that. If you say that, they'd be like, "What do you mean it's not danger?" Like it's just like no, like we understand. Like the people of Bamako, Mali, if you were doing some fuck shit, would handle you. Like that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that like, am I gonna walk down the street of Somali and like get shot for my phone? Like not even
Exactly.
rob, but just shot for my phone. Like most likely not. You know,
No, yeah,
like
exactly.
as an average person that's there, like most likely not. And you know, and like that's a thing that I think people don't take into account because like even in Toronto, like certain neighborhoods you can get robbed, like certain neighborhoods not. It kind of depends.
Yeah.
But like, you know, there's places like you know, like places like in like Montreal and places like wherever where it's just like, you know, like, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, well, I mean, Canada's not that quite that dangerous for things like that. Canada's more like B&E's and property crime. It's more like what people have.
Canada's
Um,
definitely better in comparison to the US. There's no doubt about
but
that.
yeah, but in the US, like you're right. There's parts of
US.
like random cities where that happens. Like you can live in like Rochester, New York, and just get blicked for no fucking reason
Jumped at
at
fucking,
all.
you
Like,
can
you know what I mean? Like
get your ass jumped in fucking Arkansas. You feel me? Like, like it's
that.
like that in the US. Like it's just underclass. The underclass is everywhere, and people have to resort to violence, and people have to resort to stealing to feed their families, to feed
And to
themselves.
the point where I think like every other person in like the society has that mindset where it's like you know like you think like okay it would only be like you know a dude wearing like a Nike hoodie and some track pants that would do that or whatever some like you know shitty like some t-shirts and shitty jeans that would do that like a guy who has nothing doing that but then the most people that actually end up doing that those things I think like you know probably have more than that right and you know usually talk about it um and everything like that. And then, but sorry, but you go from there and then you go all the way up and then to the point where you're getting it like to where you see like, you know, like, oh, like, you know, a dude with like in khakis and like a button down shirt with behind his family, like, you know, and like a $300,000, $500,000 house in the background with like 4 AR-15s and like they're just as ready to go as anyone else. You know what I mean? And like for different reasons and towards different targets. But like, you know, it creates a society that I think is kind of in a way safe from certain things and safe from certain types of corruption because it's just like you know well like everybody has a gun everybody's self-sufficient like you know nobody like you know things like the mafia for most it's like for most things it would just be completely unnecessary like what the hell would I need that type of protection
Behind
for if I
everything
can
fast.
if I'm trading like if I'm trading like you know like 5 hours a week with the boys like I don't need that you know what I mean like
Yeah.
and the same thing economically too if you like pull your money together and you get really like you know like have a really like close friend group but which not everybody has but like it is more normal there and everything to like share your stuff
Yeah, yeah, and mutual aid, community based, right? And it definitely comes in contrast because the U.S. and,
it's
and
not
the
the
West
America, America, really.
system it relies on, it kind of it reinforces itself based on this hyper individualist model of everybody fend for themselves, you know, free for all, everybody for everybody, you know. Whereas in a lot of different societies and a lot of different cultures in the global South, it's very community based, it's very community driven, very mutual aid based, right? And you see
Mm.
that definitely in the Rojava project a lot. It's this almost really good. I'm not going to say perfect. Nothing is perfect, but it's an ideal reconciliation between the individual and also collectivism, right? A lot of people have this misconception that collectivism is just top-down communism. It's just this top-down state capitalism. You know, you look at models like Rojava, it's not that way at all. It's this blend of individualism with collectivism at the same time.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, when you have that blend, when you have kind of vertical state institutions subservient to community institutions, when you have the state subservient to community political models, you create this separation from corruption, not only corruption, but also just intervention in general, because the communities become self-sufficient in general, and they can work with other communities to make other communities self-sufficient, right? And that's essentially what an economic model of mutual aid is, right? It starts at the individual level, me and you talking, right, and just supporting people in the community. That's the individual level of mutual aid. Then you can have the community level of mutual aid, which can be found in Rojava, right? You have communities supporting one another based off of, you know, we have this certain resource that this other community may not have as much in abundance, so we'll do some, you know, we'll do some distribution here, or you know, and it's things like that. Whereas in vertical top-down societies, which is pretty much most nation states across the world, you have very vertical institutions which are not horizontal. There's no mechanism for subservience of the community, or subservience of the state to the community. The communities are always marginalized in a vertical state, and that's one of the fundamental issues with Marxism Leninism in particular. The communities are given no voice, essentially, and whatever voice they are given, it's nominal. It has no power, right? And there's kind of this illusion that communities are given power when they're really not, right? And that's kind of what Marxism Leninism revolves around. It has this really small ruling class kind of making the decisions for everybody. And it's not good because it makes communities hollow. It completely hollows out communities, and it makes them dependent on this central structure. Whereas in Rojava and Chiapas, you have communities in charge of basically everything. Communities themselves, community councils, community organizations, the civil society of communities themselves are in power over all the institutions. They have control over all the institutions within their own communities because it's decentralized, it's socially decentralized, but also in a sense that's anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist at the same time. The communities themselves can resist the occupation of larger forces. Whereas when you have a nation state that's vertical, a unitary nation state, which has a ruling class that makes decisions for everybody else, which can be found in pretty much every nation state, right? Canada has, the parliament, the prime minister, right? You have the parliamentary system. In the US, you have the so-called representative democracy. It's really representative of nobody but the ruling class, right? You have a ruling class which is separate from the general population. They're paid off by the corporate sectors, right? And at the end of the day, really, when you have that really small ruling class, when you have just less than 1% of the population making decisions for 99% of the population, there are so many huge issues that come as a result of that. And that's definitely one of the important mechanisms that a lot of kind of newly independent states can kind of look toward, as well as a mechanism to resist dependence as well. A lot of these countries have all the resources to become independent, and Thomas Sankara did this very well. It wasn't a super centralized distribution. It was the way Sankarism worked was you had distributions based on community mechanisms. Communities give what they have too much of, or communities take what they don't have enough of, right? And Burkina Faso became self-sufficient based off of that model, right? And even though Burkina Faso was nominally Marxism-Leninism, it used the most fundamental assets of Marxism-Leninism to redistribute items at a community level, at a very much so community level, right? That increased infrastructure, increased, community opportunities, and it lifted poverty first and foremost, right? Whereas after Sankara, you have this shift to neoliberalism, which is part of why Marxism-Leninism in a state form is not really sustainable, because when you have this state, when you have the state structure, it is so easy for a coup to happen. It is so easy for a neoliberal bloc to just come in and reverse all the progress that had just taken place over the last few decades or what have you, right? And it's so depressing what happened in the case of Burkina Faso, because that's exactly what happened, right? You had kind of this unitary structure which was taken advantage of by the military bloc. The military took advantage of that, launched a coup. Then you have this neoliberal bloc that comes in and basically makes Burkina Faso dependent on France again. So it's like that's where the state model has significant flaws, whether it's Marxism-Leninism or a neoliberal state. At the end of the day, the nation state is always going to gravitate toward capitalism, and I think it's important for people to understand that. And that's where democratic confederalism and communalist models come into play to combat that. You see that in Rojava, Chiapas, Barbacha in Algeria as well. You see that in a lot of Tuareg communities in Algeria, Mali, and Libya. The community-driven models are always the most sustainable, and they are always the ones that last the longest and also resist the most dependency from external imperialist actors, right? And because when you give communities power to make their own decisions, you open up so many different aspects of civil society that didn't exist when the state was making all the decisions, and it's important for people to understand the power of the community. And we see that in a lot of different movements that are just kind of popping up in the West. And also I see it here in the Bay Area in Oakland. Black socialists in America, for example, have been doing an amazing job in Oakland, creating parallel structures to the city government, for example, which is very neoliberal, paid off by a lot of corporate actors. They're creating these separate community models, which are driven by the marginalized classes. Black socialists in America are creating this thing called liquid democracy, where essentially these communities themselves are making decisions parallel to the city government. They say, fuck the city government. We don't need that shit. We don't need the approval of these neoliberal landlords. We don't need the approval of the neoliberal elected officials, and that's obviously a significant flaw of electoralism too. It inherently marginalizes communities which were already marginalized, right? Which already didn't have a voice. It places the voices of the majority, or even just the neoliberals, not even the majority, the neoliberal minority, right? It places the voices of the neoliberal minority at the very helm of decision-making in whatever political chamber, political institution is in charge of that political chamber, right? The political decision-making. And Black socialists in America, man, like I'm just so proud of everything they've been doing in Oakland and the Bay Area around here, because they're really what we got in terms of like a parallel communalist structure, kind of a more like anarcho-socialist structure in the Bay Area here. And just that model is really important. And you kind of saw that for a brief time during the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, but that was hijacked by neoliberals and liberals really quickly. And that was like,
yeah, and you can see it as soon as they changed the name from the Chaz to the Chop. I'm like Capitol Hill, what something, some I can't remember what they called it,
yeah,
project. Yeah, but it's like in the government, like I found that like a lot of people from like the class the government comes from, like a lot from like the upper class kind of infiltrated that movement. We're just like, oh, I want to participate in this, but they were not left leaning nor anarchists nor like any sort of like anti-authoritarian, and it made it into like this really weird like LGBT rainbow capitalism type thing instead. You know what I mean? Instead of it just being like anarchist like thing, which was like, those labels don't even need to apply because it's just humans being humans, really. But
part of the problem with that is it was too centralized. It was too unitary.
It's a very specific brand too of like. There's like I don't know how to explain it, but there's a lot of like patronization of like the individual in those ideologies and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Figure worship, right? And that's part of the major flaws.
It's like I found that unfortunately, and I think even just like like being in that sphere for a while and stuff like I wouldn't say before because I was actually a leftist before I even really interacted with neoliberal politics or LGBTQ politics actually. But like one thing that really always made me sad and like disheartened me is just the way that that LGBTQ people would like kind of talk about themselves politically, or just like the tone they would use. It would just the tone was always like, I don't know everything and I need a lot of help. It was like always the tone. And then like, but the person saying that is like a badass up towards like 4 countries, you know what I mean? Or something like that. And it's like obviously a self-sufficient person that doesn't need to like look at themselves that way. But like it's almost like being conditioned in a way, and maybe because of like the stigma against it and stuff like that, or like the history of oppression, not stigma, but a history of violence and oppression. Because like for instance in Toronto, like they had like a thing called like the bathhouse raids that you should definitely Google, where like the Toronto police literally just like busted into random gay bars and like beat the shit out of people and killed people and like disappeared people even, and like key figures and stuff. Like they were like communist dignitaries, like they're what I mean, like, and like not that I want that to happen to communists, like political pretty political opponents, because like that or anything like that, but it's just fucked, you know what I mean? Like also just that idea too, like that actually like completely, I would say completely showcases and proves just that like idea of like our society being proposed, actually being like shown as like the premier society. Like if you are living on Earth, you want to live in the West. That's what everybody's told.
Yeah, it's part of the spectacle.
If you're living on Earth and you're like, and you're not like the same, then like, in any way, like me as a Black person, like I don't really like living in the West because like I can't be smart or like be a person without having to have an excuse or a weird history about that. Like there's people that will just, and also like without like being vulnerable in ways that other people aren't vulnerable, like people could literally just look at me and say I'm a drug dealer, and not just any drug dealer, but like a high level drug dealer, and like with very little evidence, like or a real like without even really justifying it or backing it up. You know what I mean? And like that depends on who the person is. Like a Black person would actually have to like make up a bunch of shit for that to happen, and a white person would not.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And like especially if they're speaking to other white people, they just have to be like, I don't know, like what he really did for money. He didn't make a lot, but he's downtown. Like maybe he sells drugs as well. Boom, done. All of a sudden I'm a drug dealer, even if I've never touched a bag. 1,000. Very serious thing. But like a Black person would have to be like, yeah, well, I know, like if they'd have to actually lie and say that they know a person that like did like that's like saw me do this or was there. They'd have to lie and say that they were there themselves half the time. Actually, is usually what they have to do, and put themselves like in a completely fucked up situation where they have to like pretend that they were there seeing me do that. You know what I mean? And that puts like that like like for example, that puts a whole like puts a whole, like what I want to say, but I don't say a whole dynamic, but like it definitely like destroys the dynamic of the community in that way, where it's just like, okay, like ingrained, it's almost like, I don't say ingrained, but just like not as like an outward rule, but just like habitually, like I'll believe white people more than black people, like in the society, like habitually believing white people more than black people actually like
Yeah.
ruins society or ruins like, I want to cry be like ruins individuals' lives, but just like ruins society even in
Yeah.
a way where it's like,
The social hegemonic norm, you know,
and, like,
the entire way.
it's the only thing that can create a situation like where like people like talk about like extraordinary situations where like a black dude crashes his car, calls 911 and gets shot, which actually happened, right? Like that's a classic story people know, like an anti-police story that people know. It's like that's the only way that could happen is like a person not believing that that person crashed their car or had that car in the first place. Like that's the only way that could happen. You know, if you believe the person, then that just literally just can't happen. You know, so it's like that's where I think of. I want to say that's where like the discrepancy starts, whatever. Now I'm on a completely different topic, civil rights or whatever. But like, you know, and not even civil rights, but just basic human rights, actually.
It's all interconnected, you know, it's all
Yeah.
interconnected with state norms and state structures. And
Yeah.
when you have kind of a hegemonic class, like even in Canada, like Canada is definitely not immune from the white hegemony, because that's essentially what the Canadian state is based around. It's based around the Canadian white settler colonial dynamic, which is the same essentially as the US is based on, right? And that's how both of our governments are kind of situated in. They're kind of based in this
But
settler dynamic.
I would literally say that America has a way more of a functioning government, I think, than Canada does in a certain way.
You think so?
And it's just I just feel like it's more independent, like from like other things. And I want to say it in this way where it's like it's not necessarily independent from powerful people or powerful like corporate interest groups, but like Canada's just like really weird and open in a situation where like any kind of rich guy can like get in a room with like the right politician and kind of make things happen that like they would not be able to make happen in the US. You know what I mean? And it like it's not like
You think so?
like the US you actually have to be like, you know, like the CEO of like you know, like for instance, like Donald Trump got in trouble because he took campaign funding from the CEO of a pillow company. That would never happen in Canada. Like there's actually a story like Chapo Trap House covered it and everything. And like Trump was actually humiliated for like not only taking money from that guy. I think the company's called My Pillow or something, but like not only taking money from the guy, but letting the guy speak at like a campaign fundraiser and all that. And they're just like, who is this CEO? Like, you know, that's what Americans like who's this CEO? What the hell is he make? What the hell does he do? You know, in Canada, they just like the guy's rich and has a business, so he must be able to, you know, like what does he want? Let's see what he wants. And if you know, and then all of a sudden, like they skip like a whole massive damn step instead of like being able to just like, and then they're just able to like kind of just like walk in the room and then like make whatever deal. And you know, unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, that ends up screwing the average person over. Like nobody's like walking in, like, you know, like no like rich CEOs like walking in there trying to make a deal where it's just like, okay, we're gonna make public transportation free. And then
Yeah,
like, you know, then the government officials like, no, no, you can't do that. No, how are you gonna do that? I won't, I don't care. That they say like, oh, I have pictures of like you and like your underage fiance in the Bahamas last year to like make that happen. Like they don't do shit like that. They don't need it for that reason. Like nobody's collecting dirt, doing stuff like that to like
like the
make
whole
everyday life better.
no cap, the Epstein shit, that reminds me. But yeah, like a lot of that kind of revolves around kind of different forms of oligopoly. The idea that the economy is controlled by monopolies, right? Like particularly in the U.S. economy is definitely more dominated by monopolies than what do they call them? Small to medium-sized enterprises, right? SMEs, as they would call them in the UK and Canada, right? Canada's economy is definitely more so situated around SMEs, small to medium enterprises.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you have CEOs which are not necessarily blocked out and crowded out by these huge corporate monopolies, these huge corporate CEOs and stuff, which is essentially the model that exists in the US. Essentially, our economy is dominated by a select few companies which completely crowd out all the small, medium enterprises, right, in the US.
Yeah.
Like the entirety of small businesses here in the US are completely crowded out by monopolies. And like there's so many different layers of shit that needs to happen before capitalism in the US is reversed. And I think one of the first things that needs to happen, even though this is not as convenient to a lot of Marxist thinkers, is the fact that I think in order for capitalism to truly be toppled, you have to start with small businesses having more power than huge corporations. And a lot of leftists kind of conflate corporations all into this monolithic entity. All corporations are the same as small corporations.
I feel
I don't really buy into that.
I
You
think a
know,
lot of leftists also find money to be like not dirty, but like earning money in certain ways kind of dirty. Like if you're not like a wage person or you're not like starting like a organic soap business, then people kind of are like kind of weirded out by like like by what you're doing and like question whether it's really for like those for that cause and for that end. And I think that unfortunately kind of limits like the scope and like the actual base that like leftists can actually reach because like not everybody I don't know, not everybody wants to buy like moccasins or whatever, or wants to buy like I don't know, like the organic coffee or like something like, and not everybody wants that, some people just want to go to like the grocery store and buy Maxwell House like every day of their life. So
yeah.
what do you do with those people? How do you reach those people? And and I think like leftists really like if they're able to reach that demographic, then you can get a situation where like you can convince a lot more people to like have that mindset. And once a lot more people have that mindset, then you have like the world
Yeah,
of like the beauty you want.
yeah,
Not necessarily want to bring everybody into that because there is like a thing I also find that leftists um like actually I'll be honest with you. Actually, I think that like I'll reverse what I was saying. Actually, I think that like leftists actually are very kind of decent at knowing which types of people are actually interested genuinely in like the ideology for like their values. Where I find like the right, like they kind of struggle with that. It's just kind of like, and especially like libertarians, like right-leaning libertarians, it's very much like anybody who has like a weird kind of kooky idea. Like it kind of seems like that, but it's just like they kind of have this whole thing where it's like this is for everybody. You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like this is for everybody. So like, you can't tell me that like, like you can't tell me that like the most like best example I find for that is like how like it's like a running joke on the left that like people on the right liberals are like all pedophiles, whatever. They think pedophilia is okay. You know what I mean? Like you heard that meme, right? So it's just like, how do you
yeah.
even get people like that in that group and like make that part of the political ideology? Like it's just like,
Yeah.
just like being like, okay, well, I want to be free. Is this free? Like, like I don't
That's
know,
one of the major
no.
conversations.
So like,
It's definitely one of the
yeah,
major conversations among the left in particular. Like, how do you get people who are dependent on capitalist mechanisms to be anti-capitalist, right? And the right does a really similar job in kind of sweeping the working class into this kind of ideational dependency on, say, the Republican Party here in the U.S. Does a really good job at kind of sweeping the white working class in particular under kind of common norms that are held among it, right? And it's a very similar dynamic among Leninist movements as well. When you look at the spread of influence among the Soviet Union did a really similar job at kind of relying on commonly held rhetoric and commonly held norms to sweep across the working class, right? And that's something that the left is absolutely abysmal at. The left does not really know how to make narratives become more inclusive of more people.
yeah,
It's very exclusionary. A lot of kind of narratives among the left are exclusionary to certain populations, right? Like kind of a more urban idea of how social dynamic works is probably going to exclude a more agrarian or agricultural understanding or rural understanding of how social dynamic works, right? Um,
and I
so in
find
that
too
sense,
because like how, oh sorry man,
no, no,
I also kind of find like just because of like how like we talk about the Overton window and stuff like that, and like left versus right. And I find that like the Overton window, especially and nowadays, is actually quite moved to the right, right? And it's, in most cases, like wartime or things like that, it changes. Like back when it was Obama, like it was like a little more to the left, like and everything. But um, it's at that point now where I think it's just so right that like if you were like if you were like a neoliberal person, normal neoliberal person, like what we think of as a normie or whatever, if you were to like be a left leaning person, it would actually probably make you more like center right even, nowadays just because of like where the things are at. So it puts people in a position where if you like, like what people will be like, okay, well, I'm not that far left, but it's like, I'm like, but I am like left or whatever. So it would put a lot of people like, like everybody makes fun of like liberals and makes fun of like, like that type of like dynamic, but like a liberal is like almost like literally like on that part of the left now. And so just considering where people's values are at and where people's like values have been coached to be at, where it's just like,
yeah,
like for instance, like protesting isn't really okay. Like what the hell? You know what I mean? Like in the 60s and the 50s and everything, like everybody protests. Everybody protested. Like Republicans would protest just as much as people on the left would protest. and now it's at a situation where it's like, if you protest, well, you have to like figure out why, and you don't want to be one of those inappropriate BLM guys that like break things or block roads. And it's like, if the protest doesn't disrupt anything, it's not a protest. It's like, it's like just a person on the street like saying a thing over and over again. Like I could just go outside and do that right now and just start like saying like random stuff over and over again and call it a protest.
It
You know what I
definitely,
mean?
it
But
definitely,
if I don't like stand in the middle of the road and block traffic and disrupt people's day and get people to be like, what is going on, then there is no point. Otherwise, like it gives people the option to just kind of be like, oh, well, it's not like disrupting anything. So I can't, it won't like, then you get to like biological responses and you get like to the human body. And it's like, then that won't like actually trigger the response in the person's brain to be like, okay, my route to work is blocked. I need to understand why. You know what I mean? And like, okay, Trayvon Martin was shot, George Floyd was choked. Sandra Bland was shot, like, was abducted. You know what I mean? Like all these things happening to the Black community has made like not just Black people, because I've seen a bunch of white people and different colored people like standing in front of my car that I, like, you know what I mean? Like it puts them all in a position where they all took the day off of work to like come into the middle of the road and say, don't kill, murder, or abduct us, members of like the police force, or like white community, don't shoot Aubrey while he's jogging. You know what I mean? Like, or things like that. It's really like, like that's how you would get people's attention and stuff like that. And so it's very interesting because like you can kind of notice the difference too between like anti-mask protests, which are now finally starting to get a little more rowdy and stuff like that. And I think that might unfortunately be what changes, like, or like this makes like protest more useful as like a tool against like power. Because unfortunately it's easy to send a bunch of cops and tear gas people and literally just straight up shoot and like arrest people indefinitely for a bunch of days. Like normal guys that work at Pizza, like being in jail for like, days on days and days with like murderers and rapists and scammers and everything. Just because they got arrested under like a conspiracy to riot, like J20, like there's people still in jail from J20, like, just protesting Donald Trump.
yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? Like, like there's a lot of people I know that like may not ever agree with protests that would literally go out and protest Donald Trump. And then you have to say like dumb things like, oh, they weren't breaking anything, but like they should be allowed to break stuff. Like they should be allowed to like smash a window, like they pay for it. Their tax dollars pay for that. Like you can't tell me I can't do all that. Like you can't tell me I can't do all that. I mean, you can, but like, I'm doing all that.
I think,
You know what I mean? So it's one of those really in certain ways. So
yeah, for sure. And just hopping off of that, like, I think a lot of kind of people's perceptions of different political norms, people's perceptions of different social norms, a lot of it is rooted in kind of the, not to get too theoretical, not to like put too much like academic theory onto, a given situation, but definitely I think a lot of perceptions kind of tie into the Marxist understanding of dialectical materialism, right? People perceive certain norms based off of regional processes that occur, right? People perceive certain norms based off of how processes have unfolded maybe within their own communities, maybe within their own regions, or in this case, within the country itself, right? You have kind of commonly held norms across the country, right? Some random some random working class white dude in Arkansas is probably going to have a really similar political outlook as some random working class white dude in say Maine or I don't know, the middle of Arizona, the more conservative areas of Arizona. Like people have these very kind of monolithic understandings of things based off of people who have kind of already conceived these understandings, right? And that's where critical thought is harmed. Critical thought is harmed in these kind of groupthink understandings, right? Which have emerged from kind of isolated communities and isolated understandings of the processes of the world, which are dominated by a select few thinkers, right? And it kind of ties in again to the sphere of consensus, right? The sphere of consensus of information is dominated by a select few academics, a select few members of the elite who have the power to control narratives. These elitists have the power to control narratives and rhetoric and channels of information, right? So as a result of that, you kind of have two massive blocks that think very similarly, and when you think about,
I think people just get too used to that, like two different groups of people thinking similarly and not opposite in any way. Like I think also, especially like in countries like Canada, especially, but also the United States, where it's like you go to an election and like everybody kind of has like almost like the same like thing that they want to do, but like one or two things are really different. I mean,
Yeah,
Canada's a little bit better than that. Like you have like, like three, like four, five main parties. So you kind of get like more variation. They all kind of have to be different than the other. I found in the US, especially because it's like the two-party system, it's like almost like it depends on who's running, but like for instance, like Biden and Trump, like it was almost identical half of the stuff they were saying. You know what I
absolutely.
mean? Like, like they were nobody was I don't want to say they're the same, sorry, but like the things that they were wanted to change weren't like really like that
Radical.
dramatic
Yeah.
even and stuff
All
like that.
part of the same
Like
consensus.
you had Bernie Sanders saying like literally make school free, like make college free. And then you have Biden just like not
All of
even
that is already a norm in Europe,
yeah,
say, right? And the Labor
yeah,
Party is already, it's already a norm over there. Like Bernie would be seen as a centrist in Europe, essentially, right? You have
exactly.
regional dynamics like that, and it all relates to the sphere of consensus for sure. You know, like just this understanding that like, and just every election cycle we have here in the U.S., and I'm sure it's similar in Canada, it all kind of revolves around this common consensus that the nation state must exist in its unitary form. It
Yeah, and
must
that actually
exist.
the nation state must exist, that there must be countries. It's like people don't understand that for most of the human history, there hasn't really been countries. Like, like a kingdom is not a country. Like the kingdom is like King James.
In
And then
ancient
like King
times,
James has
communities were
knights, King
independent.
James has priests,
Yeah,
King James
we had
has
city states as
like,
well. So,
serfs. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that's how England used to run, and and like nobody's gonna
Our ancestors went about
So,
things, and you introduce the nation state into the picture. You
the
have all these
modern
different
nation state is
all
it's like 200 years old.
developed.
Bourgeois revolution in France, like and like just that time in Europe, like
Yeah,
made a whole system that like they ended up enforcing on the world because they went and like explored for like new things to like sell each other basically. Like, I guess is
basically what.
to
Yeah, the
use like
nation state is what.
that's really why my country got colonized. It's just like man's needed bananas and spices and and whatever, and then you talk to like another person's like country and they went there for that, and then you talk to another person's country and they went there for that, and and everybody has like a story with like Europe knocking on their door and basically saying like, what do you guys got? Like, you might trade for it for now. But like eventually, like unfortunately, also Europe also has that thing too, where like in their history, I find where like they start off trading, like even in Africa, like which is like always omitted just to kind of degrade Africa and degrade the African person. But like in
Yeah,
the beginning, like Portugal started trading with Congo, and so like they were the Portuguese, the first people to ever Europeans to go to the African continent, and the first people to really like trade with them or anything.
for sure.
And like they started off trading with like Congo and Angola, and like what modern day would be modern day Congo, like Angola, but
Yeah,
sorry, not Angola, sorry, but like Congo, because that was actually just like the Kingdom of Congo, like King of Zinga and all that. Just
yeah.
like trading with them and stuff like that, like work captives, obviously like like the commodities of the land and stuff like that, like banana, blah blah blah, and then all that. And start out trading with them normally, and then eventually, like they capture a couple Congolese citizens and take them off as slaves, and that just becomes like a low key thing. It's like I don't know if it's like a who can tell the difference thing or like screw them thing. I'm not sure. I wasn't like wasn't there in the 1400s, but like the individual ego like motivation, emotional motivation of like the actual traders, Portuguese traders there. And why they would like not differentiate or not be able to differentiate between a Congolese citizen and like one of their like one of like the local tribes that they subjugate. But like that just kind of shows like, and that's a very important part, because it's like where was Portugal, were the Portuguese there unwilling to respect that, or did they not know how to?
Yeah.
Because that would change the whole dynamic of even just like the scramble for Africa, or just like the slave trade even. But like either way, they ended up like like just like trading Congolese citizens instead of whatever, and then like eventually like I think they even fought a war over that, and like I think the first time Congo actually won a naval battle, like they actually won the first like invasion or whatever, and then they kept coming back, and I think, and I'm not sure whether it was I actually don't think Portugal ended up taking over. I think the Congolese actually just sort of beat the Portuguese, and then later on, but I'm sorry, my African history now is like a little rusty because I read all that in and History of African Revolt by what's his name, like 2 years ago. So I'm not gonna pretend to remember all that, but yeah,
Yeah,
like
for sure.
yeah,
When people look at the history of international political economy, it becomes so clear that modern nation state borders are directly tied to colonialism. When you looked at the original imperialism, right? We're looking at the example of Portugal colonizing the African continent, right? France, Britain, Portugal, Spain, kind of competing over a colonization of the global South, what is today the global South, right? When you look at the roots of the nation state system, the nation state system evolved directly outside of that. It evolved directly after that, essentially. Directly following that period of initial, oh, okay, these are just empires. You know, when you break empires down into nation states, essentially reducing that colonialism into a more concentrated force now, you know. And when you look at the kind of borders of Africa, it's so reminiscent of the borders that were constructed by imperialist powers, right? The British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, Spanish Empire, French Empire. You see that the nation state itself is really just trying to obliterate the power of communities, trying to obliterate the power of tribal sovereignty, of indigenous sovereignty, right? And so much of that, and just the understanding that the nation state system has emerged out of that colonial cycle, that colonial process. It's important to understand that that's exactly why the nation state is obsolete, particularly in late stage capitalism. And I think a fair number of leftists and a fair number of people don't really understand that still. They don't really understand that the nation state system is really a product of capitalism. It's really a product of everything that causes oppression. You know, it's really a product of imperialism itself. And people don't really realize that the nation state system as we see it doesn't matter if it's nominally classless, doesn't matter if it's an SSR, doesn't matter if it's a Soviet Socialist Republic or what have you. The basics of the nation state are consistently going to oppress marginalized people. The basics of the nation state are consistently going to reinvite capitalism in sooner or later, right? And it's always going to eliminate community sovereignty. And communities are always 100% of the time the first victims of unitary power in a nation state, right? The ruling class is going to try to assume absolute power over all of the sovereign structures that are in existence already. And a lot of that first began under colonialism, right? Tying that back to the kind of original history of contemporary international political economy, right? When you have the emergence of the nation state system, you have to ask yourself, well, what did the nation state system emerge with, particularly in the global South? What are the borders that we see today? Where did the borders that we see today emerge from? They emerged from imperialism. They emerged from the interests of these huge empires. And essentially, that's keeping the nation states that were those empires before, it's keeping those nation states in power over their former colonies, whether it's directly or indirectly. You know, it's all kind of this sphere of dependency on former colonies, which is what modern day borders are constructed to reflect, right? All the borders that we see today, they only have the considerations of former ruling classes in mind, really. It's none of it has community interests in mind. None of it has tribal interests in mind. Nobody is sovereign under these borders except less than 1% of the population, the elite, right? The ruling class. Those are the only people who are truly sovereign in these nation states, right? Nobody else is really sovereign. And that's where horizontal power must come into play to reverse the oppression that's caused by vertical unitary nation state structures, you know. But yeah, that's just my communalist rant, you know. I'm a democratic confederalist rant, you know. You know how I be, just ranting about the nation state system all damn day. You feel me? That's how I be.
Not really, yo, that's good though. That's good. Like the funny thing is we didn't even like introduce or do anything like at all. We just kind of like just like went right into it. So I like that. I think
I love that, man. Hey, we're passionate about what we do, and that's what it's all about, you know. That's how we
I feel you. I think maybe to wrap this up, and I definitely want to talk to you again, and more specifically on like your expertise, because you're doing like a lot of really amazing work. I feel like you're the guy for things like Rojava and Tigray and like any sort of like rebel type of movement.
I appreciate it.
So like I really want to talk to you like specifically, do just a specific episode just on that, even like, you know, whenever you have time.
I'd be so game. I'd be so game for sure.
For sure.
Hey, I appreciate it so much, man. Really, like it's been fucking phenomenal talking to you. And yeah, you know, I'm here for you always, you and your family for sure. You know, mutual aid is not just a physical process, but a psychological one as well. You know, it's, if there's one thing to take away from this in this podcast is definitely the fact that mutual aid is not just a physical process. It's a psychological one as well. And we all have to lift each other up around here. You know, we all have to be here for each other. And, you know, it's so important. And you're just an amazing reflection of that, man. Like your journalism, your outlet, your platform, it's putting everything in the right direction, really. And yeah, there's just so much potential, so much goddamn potential where that's concerned. And
I feel you. I mean, I think I accidentally got a bunch of rappers to practice mutual aid.
bro,
And
that's
this would
what's
be
up.
more community based. Like I
That's
feel
what's
like
up.
there's like rappers and producers that I think would never usually see each other and stuff like.
Imagine how many people
Dude.
can say that. I don't think too many people can say that. Yo, I accidentally got a bunch of fucking people to just randomly practice mutual aid. Like, bro, that's some majestic ass shit right there. That is some
Yeah.
ass behavior. What the
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
that's some divine ass mutual aid shit right there. Hey, I love it. I fucking love it, man.
For
That
sure,
goes
man.
hand in hand with everything that you do for sure. It's kind of as like a quasi like gonzo journalist. I fucking love that shit. I love that shit for sure. And yeah, I'll definitely be doing everything I can to keep boosting your channel and all that shit. So
As you, man, for sure. Sure, man. You know, I'm gonna definitely be back posting. I just set up the second Instagram to like get back into the first one. So I'm gonna be like start posting news and stuff like just like normal on there pretty much.
most
So,
stuff.
so yeah, like yeah, I really appreciate it. I just want to introduce you. This is Brendan. He's an international relations major at I think UC Oakland or
San Francisco State University. Yeah,
San
yeah.
Francisco State University.
That's right.
Yeah, and yeah, so like yeah, he's really good guy. Runs like an independent journalist, grassroots journalist. He runs Renegade Journal, Warpick, well, formerly Warpick, but like Renegade Journal is like
Sucked, man. R.I.P. Warpick.
Renegade Journal is like the main one now.
That was the main. But hey, Renegade is immortal. Renegade lives on. You feel me? Doesn't matter what the fuck these elitists at fucking Facebook are trying to do to us. You know, mutual aid is immortal. We're all fucking immortal around here. The norm is, you know.
Yeah, for real, man. Honestly, fuck the Zucking, because honestly, a lot of like that hit the community so hard. The grassroots community so hard. It's just like like just like they're like the censorship of information, different like just the algorithm basically, just like saying like this promotes like dangerous groups or like there's weapons in this picture or whatever. And that's the thing too, like none of us ever got one thing I have to say, and that we definitely should say, is that none of us ever got a strike for like fact checking or anything like that, because they have like a fact checker robot on there too, and none of us have strikes for that. Like not one of us, not like conflict news, like even Jake doesn't have like one of those. Conflict news, Jake, like a Popular Front there, Atlas News,
Yeah,
propaganda policy doesn't really do news or whatever, but like everybody's getting hit with these different things. I mean, I only got hit like with the I only got like hit once. Like I only got hit with the Zuck message once, but that was for the Iranian. That's what I was like the plug on the Iranian Revolution. Remember that?
yeah.
When like Iran has had a random anarchist uprising, and I happen to be following in the like, Farsi Anarchist Federation and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And,
I love that dude. You seen his page? Oh man,
yeah.
that dude is based as fuck. Iranian anarchism.
Yeah, like that's fire, bro. Literally, like, yeah, man.
Facebook actually made a list of so-called dangerous organizations that they take shit off. So I'm gonna send that list to you actually, if I have time, if I can find it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll send you that list so you can just like follow like what the fuck they take down and all that shit. It's literally bullshit. The post that got Warpick zucked was the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, which is literally the most harmless fucking liberation. Like they'd never targeted civilians. Like there's nothing, there's literally nothing. Like it's just a separatist group in Kashmir, which is fighting the Indian state. That's the only reason it's seen as a violent, dangerous organization. It's like,
yeah,
it's
fighting the government basically. So like that's
bullshit,
the government gets a. But I don't even know about that really. I think that's just like bullshit. Because I mean, from my mind, I kind of understand why they took the post down. I'm really surprised that like, as I post most of the same stuff that you guys do. But I think because like I also post music videos, it kind of like just like looks at the channel differently and stuff like that.
Yeah, it offsets the algorithm, so it's not.
The algorithm, yeah. So like, because like the only thing that got taken down was a picture of that Iranian cop getting shot and stuff like that. And it was like the video of it, and I put it to Yeet, like and stuff like that. And, like
the way you go about shit is just it's so magical, bro. Like the way you like throw off the algorithm and shit, like the algorithm just doesn't know what the fuck to do with you. It's like, oh, it's just this black journalist, like we kind of want to zuck him, but like he's kind of he's merging it with all this shit that might be cool. So yeah, bro, like
it's kind of cool can use like the music as cover and just be like, nah, I'm really a musician. You don't need to worry. Like, but it feels almost like I'm like a communist like journalist or like intellectual in like the US in the 50s, like hiding out and stuff. And like, like just like, oh, I love free markets. Like, or some crazy shit like that.
Like gonzo journalism type shit, except like it's fused with, the algorithm and all this shit on Instagram. It's just, yeah, the way you go about shit is just based. Like, that's all I gotta say on the matter. Like, the way you go about with your outlet and shit is based as fuck. And it's definitely something that I gotta take more motivation, information, and inspiration from as well, just so fucking Renegade doesn't get zucked one of these days. I definitely gotta throw in some of like some gonzo-esque type shit, some Hunter S. Thompson type shit.
Yeah. And honestly, I would encourage you, bro, just take your cell phone camera and just like film what's going on and stuff like that, or even just like post I mean, for Renegade Journal, be a little bit different because like mostly it's focuses on things like around the world in the global south. So like if you take like
when I'm in Roosevelt, I'll be doing a lot more of that for sure.
Yeah. So like when you go to Roosevelt, like what I would advise, bro, is like take as many like photos of just like random B-roll of like the streets of people walking daily life, and just like make sure that people like kind of get like the feel of like like I guess to say like the mise en scène, like the daily like life of like the people, because like instead of it just I think the viewers appreciate it too, but it just instead of it just being like news article, guy with a gun, guy without a gun, this and that, they'll see different things. They'll throw out the algorithm. If you ever need to pick like a report claim or something like that, or like industry related on the phone, like you'll be able to actually like tell them like, okay, but like we also like it's more than just like conflict, news, and war. Like we do this, we do this, and we do this. So just in case like like they target you for just one thing, and like but in reality like that one thing is not like the whole thing of the channel.
And I got my website too, so in case the worst comes to worst, I still got my website, my Telegram, and everything too. My first Telegram was taken down by Europol, literally taken down by Europol, bro. Like
the European police,
the police, the fucking intelligence agency of the EU took my shit down. It's like, bro, what the fuck? Like,
you already know, bro. Big ops.
Big ops. The biggest fucking ops.
The biggest ops, bro. Like which police force took your Telegram account down? Europe? Like which part of Europe? All of Europe.
All of the entirety of
every Europe.
Europe took my shit down, bro. Like, I'm dead.
That is jokes, bro. Yo, honestly, like I don't know, man. Like I don't have any like government ops like that. You got Europol. Jake has like the Turkish state still like having him in court for terrorism and shit.
I got the Turkish state on my ass too. Like, I got MI6 on my ass. I probably got the NSA on my ass. I got a lot of shit. I got the Indonesian State Intelligence Agency on my ass. Like I've seen like traces of evidence of all these motherfuckers on my platform.
I'm pretty. I don't know. For me, I just have like mob connected hackers on my ass, but like that's just over. Like it started out over just like I'll steal this guy's account and like try to make him work for me and stuff like that because he's too smart, and then it just like like you fucking connected to that sort of thing. Then that mafia hears about it, and that mafia hears about it. Then it's just like random like criminal syndicates like and shit, just like tracking me and shit and like monitoring like actually like fucking with my phone and like emails and stuff and fucking my bank account. And it's like I feel like I'm like literally like I feel like I'm like one of the that next journalist or whatever. But I think the I don't want to. I think the Russian state could be involved too, but I only say that because of like I covered the not only that I have like two things like I covered like the protests that were going on in Russia just recently, the anti-Putin ones. I got kind of violent, and I showed like like videos of like people like punching the police during protests and things like that, throwing the snowballs and things that like like when people think of Russia and the police, they think of like absolute power. You know what I mean? Like you think of like the Russian government, you think of absolute power basically. But like I have like videos on my account of people just like pelting like 10, 20 people just pelting like a group of like cops with snowballs and shit, and just like embarrassing them and all that and stuff like that. So it's like. You know what I mean? So like, I think that could be it. Then there's also the but the way that's a funny thing about governments and stuff like that is like you don't really have to do anything like wrong or even like things that actually like hurt them or humiliate them. It's just like certain people having certain information like in certain countries, like especially when it comes to Russia or like China or anything, but especially Russia, like certain people just having certain information like tends to make like gives them like already the cause of belly to go after a journalist or go after whoever and just like fuck with their thing. So like I could have like GRU like like fucking like watching her shit and just being like, did he say anything about Russia yet? Nope. Okay. Like like I don't know.
Yeah,
So it's weird, bro.
yeah.
So,
Like the thing about me is I exposed redfish. Like, redfish, it's like kind of a Russian state owned, like kind of propaganda outlet that tries to appeal to.
yeah, yeah.
Like the thing about me
I do
was,
not repose for them. I try to encourage Bella Hadid to not
uh,
repose for them.
the thing about me was like my platform, Warpick and Popular Front, were kind of the first two outlets to expose redfish as this Russian kind of controlled propaganda outlet. Because before me and Popular Front had exposed redfish, nobody really knew that it was a Russian-owned propaganda outlet. So like
Yeah.
Popular Front and Warpick kind of exposing this as a Russian state propaganda outlet kind of prompted Instagram to go be like, okay, maybe we should put a tag on redfish, which they did. They put like Russian state propaganda or Russian state.
Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck the tag was.
Russian state media,
But
whatever.
they put a tag on it
But yeah, they
basically
started
after.
doing that for everything, like even Al Jazeera and like all that. So you guys probably
Yeah.
maybe could have started that, like as a thing,
Yeah.
you know.
We could make it a thing, definitely, like community wide, just kind of like exposing certain outlets that are state owned, state propaganda agencies. I know like what is it? Xinhua News from China is definitely CCP owned. A lot of people don't know that. Chow Collective is another kind of really shady CCP. Like I don't like CCP affiliated agent. Like there's probably a bunch of Chinese agents in there too. Probably a bunch of CCP agents in Chow Collective.
Yeah.
There's just really a lot of shady outlets out there that a lot of people don't know are state backed and state owned and state controlled. And I think it's
Yeah.
definitely important for people to understand like which outlets to avoid for that. But yeah, I'll
So you
definitely
don't get like completely biased news from one angle, but I don't know. Then you do have like the state-owned um you do have state-owned media that does like an okay, that's just like okay to watch. Like you have like RT. Like me and my mom used to watch RT like growing up
yeah.
when I was like
RT,
16. Just
RT
because
has
of, like the Russian
shit.
slant is like so like
Yeah,
like the pro-Russia slant is like literally like this. You know what I mean? Like it's a joke.
exactly.
Like we were watching it during
Bros,
like
like
the
RT is
whole
so good at that. Like they're so good at creating this like super high quality platform
the
of
2014
journalism.
Ukraine stuff was amazing. Like the Euromaidan, like I watched Vice for most of the Euromaidan coverage and talked to my friend Alexa during the time like it was in Kiev, but like for that, but like bro, like all the stuff afterwards when it got to the Crimean War and sort of escalated, I think the protests escalated to like a full scale civil war that's still going on today and all that. Like bro, RT was like when they're like bro, it was so funny, bro. Before they like made Donbass and made the DNR, like they'd be like there's they were sending like I think like missile defense systems or whatever like along the border and stuff and like art and like RT like played a thing where like Putin or the foreign like minister was just like, oh, that's a video game. Like that wasn't real. Like like the footage is from a video game and shit. Like it is like the like weirdest shit.
Yeah,
Like and stuff like that. And then like RT will be like, this is just Western imperialism thinking we're helping like our allies in the region to like secure like our traditional invasions. That's actually like Russia's traditional invasion route too. Like that part of Europe. It's like if you have like a damn car, even you can just drive straight into Russia practically. Like,
yeah, for
like let alone with like a tracked vehicle that like, you just need to like fill up with gas every once in a while. So it's pretty like it's pretty wild. Like when you look at like geography and how it like shapes things, like the US is in a pretty cool position because like it being an island and it like occupying coast to coast, like it doesn't really have to worry about like a random land invasion because Mexico's pretty narrow. You'd have to land like you'd have to like and Mexico actually has a pretty robust military on its own. So you'd have to like invade Mexico, defeat Mexico, and you would probably think that's easy, but it wouldn't be easy. And especially it wouldn't be easy also because of the cartels there. So you might like take out the Mexican military, but then like those cartels that still want to do their thing and operate their business and are basically like tied in with the government, if not the government, and actually have like better equipment than the government and provide government services even in some parts like of the place, especially during the pandemic. Like we were at Archimedes posting cartels like giving out food and water and stuff like that and everything. And you know what I mean? So it's like just like as a phenomenon. And so that would be like a messy situation. Like if I was like a US intelligence person trying to like divert a Russian like invasion, I'd be like, bro, attack Mexico, they're so weak and they probably get screwed up. Like just by Mexico itself, like if they even make it to the US border, if they even make it to the Rio the Rio River, and everything.
Rio Grande. Yeah,
Rio Grande, sorry, if they even make it to the Rio Grande. But then it depends on how Russia deploys its forces. Are they doing an expeditionary thing? Are they just going to do like, a quick little strike team? Are they going to go full Afghanistan with it and just like try to build a country on top of the US? Like there's 50 million like ways to like actually like fight a war. So, you know what I mean?
The
So,
scary part is like
yeah,
that wouldn't
but
even that
I think
wouldn't
I think even Canada actually, unfortunately, I think our country will be a better invasion route because if like it's just more sparsely populated And there's like parts of like there's parts, unfortunately, there's actually situations where Russia could like just land in Canada and drive like straight past
Yeah,
major cities and like not even interact with like humans for like a long time and
yeah,
literally just like cross the US border and
that's what
invade
Japan
like
kind of tried to
Wyoming
do in World
or
War
some
II.
shit or
Yeah,
Montana.
that's kind of what Japan tried to do with like the Aleutians campaign during World War II. Like the Japanese Empire did a really interesting job at trying to like penetrate into kind of the core of North America by trying to infiltrate into the Aleutian Islands, even
Yeah.
though because the Aleutian Islands are very like kind of uninhabited. There's not a huge population in the Aleutian Islands, so like as a result of that, you don't have as much surveillance of the islands. So Japan was kind of like slowly creeping up on the Aleutian Islands, kind of avoiding a lot of the surveillance of the U.S. And as a result of that, they were like successful in the early stages of capturing a lot of the islands. But yeah, Russia could definitely do something similar. Like that would be
Yeah.
it wouldn't be unusual. Like say some random ass like catastrophic ass global conflict took place involving Russia and the U.S. And honestly, like I don't like even given all the flashpoints going on right now with China and say Japan, Russia, all the like all the flashpoints which are particularly
Actually
in
a lot of like that's the funny thing too is like I find like in this time in human history, there's a lot more like flashpoints for wars and actual wars.
yeah,
A
that's
lot
one of
more like
the
places
studies.
where wars
Yeah,
could start if things go wrong or go sideways. Because even like China and India on the border, like they're like there's like flashpoints there and stuff, and India and Pakistan. That like those are like two countries that are like have major like nuclear populations and like population of 1 billion that people aren't even thinking
like
about.
confrontations
You know,
essentially, right? Yeah, confrontations like interstate confrontations have definitely kind of replaced the mechanism for interstate war because I feel like there's definitely more incentives now than there was before. Uh, like one of the big kind of stereotypical one incentives for that would be like nukes, right? Nuclear weapons would definitely kind of maybe be deterrents for these huge global superpowers, like just fucking socking the shit out of each other and creating another global world war because nobody wants.
they're supposed to be until people use nuclear bombs differently though, because like there's like people like Douglas MacArthur that suggested like the tactical nuking of North Korea during the Korean War, where it's like you don't like and tactically nuking China, where it's like you don't like Hiroshima the place, but like you nuke things along the border so troops can't move because of the radiation, blow up a couple factories, blow up some key bases, blow up like key cities that produce everything. And
Yeah.
then you pretty much have like the country without like it even looking like a Hiroshima situation where you just like firebomb every major Japanese city to rubble and then do a nuclear bomb is like practically as a joke almost. You know
There's
what I
also
mean? Like,
there's also like dirty bombs are like kind of these explosives that are laced with radioactive material. They're much easier to produce, much cheaper to produce than actual like nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs. And that's definitely something that's much scarier because it's far more accessible and it's far more easier to produce. And of that kind of the emergence of the dirty bomb kind of coinciding with the emergence of drone warfare as well and kind of hybrid warfare, right? And it'll just be interesting to see kind of like what regional conflicts emerge during our lifetimes, what kind of regional conflicts are going to emerge. And I think it's still going to be kind of an emulation of the Cold War era. I think a lot of nation states, a lot of superpowers are going to want to rely on proxy wars more than actual direct confrontations. And that's essentially what we're already kind of seeing, right? You've seen that in Libya, Syria, Yemen, of course, right? It's definitely a continuation of the post-Cold War era, right? I think we're definitely going to be seeing a lot more regional proxy wars rather than interstate wars. And a lot of that just kind of superpowers taking advantage of kind of embattled countries and countries in the midst of an intrastate conflict like a civil war, right? There's definitely going to be like a lot more interventions in that sense. And obviously that's a better alternative to just having an all-out World War III or some shit, and
yeah,
obviously it's going to
which I think is
result.
still, I think unfortunately might still happen, but like,
There's definitely a chance,
like
there's definitely a chance. There's always a chance.
because it's just like there's just too many I wouldn't say there's too many flashpoints and too many this and that, but it's just like also the whole like the big thing in the 2000s, like when we were growing up, was like the individual actor, like the individual terrorist, the individual bad guy. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we're not invading Iraq, like we're not like like not anymore, like we're after the terrorists, we're after the insurgents, we're after Osama. You know what I mean? Like we're after, and even with Iraq, it wasn't like the Iraqi people, it was Saddam Hussein.
Like
It was like
we're not
Gaddafi.
invading the
It
country,
was
we're
yeah.
combating a
So
certain group of people, right? And
yeah,
it's
so it's
part of
like
the illusion.
powerful, like well-armed individuals. And I mean, unfortunately, only in that context, like you don't see like, NATO talking about like the head of the DNR and like Eastern Ukraine and being like, oh, we need to get that guy, like that specific guy to like, people aren't like, people aren't doing things like that. Um, but like, yeah, that was like the big thing in the 2000s, like when we were growing up and stuff with the whole like war on terror. Like that's essentially what the war on terror was. It was like targeting like these individuals that may like that have like a decent sized force that could like, either like may not be able to overthrow a whole country at all, but like could definitely cause significant damage and like disruption to like the infrastructure and like everyday like quality of life for the people there. So like that's what even inspired video games, I think like Modern Warfare 2 and stuff like that, where you have like Makarov as a character. It's like we're not after Russia, we're after a Russian, and not because he's Russian or because of the state. It's because like like he is wants to like like shoot up airports and do terrorist attacks and blah 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 blah.
Analogy right there. Yeah.
So
That's a great.
so
Modern Warfare series definitely kind of reflected this idea of like modern hybrid war, right? Where you have like this combination of technological warfare with physical warfare as well. Meanwhile, you have massive civil societies and entire economies and regions and just societies in general completely obliterated as a result of that. You have these superpowers kind of coming in and targeting a single group of people, meanwhile obliterating everything in their path, which in turn gives power to their own adversaries, right? And that's what we've seen in Afghanistan, even Iraq to an extent. The obliteration of society in the midst of this huge invasion targeting a single actor. Naturally, when you obliterate the economic forces in the local markets in the wake of that, you're going to give more power and recruitment power to the adversaries who you're trying to target. And that's essentially why we've seen the Taliban become so powerful. It's part of the reason why we've seen the Taliban rise to power in Afghanistan and topple the Afghan state. It's because, in a sense, a lot of their recruitment has derived from this common resentment among the Afghan people of U.S. intervention, right? And just airstrike after airstrike and war crime after war crime, all of that accumulates and builds up and creates this popular resentment toward the occupying force, right? And oftentimes that'll give more power to unethical powers, like say ISIS. Even ISIS has been emboldened as a result of that, as a result of you have these
the
really
thing with ISIS is ISIS was like a literal country. Like
oh
I
yeah,
think people like discount that. Like we still talk about them as if they were a terror group. Like that was a little country with
basically a
passports.
state.
Like
It was basically a
and
state for a period of
yeah,
like
like
years.
no, like I'm not kidding. Like if you watch the documentaries and stuff like that, especially like all the Vice stuff, like it was like a literal functioning state. Like they had their own like infrastructure. Like the infrastructure was built by the previous state, of course, but the distribution of the infrastructure, they managed that. They had their own court and judicial system.
Securitization as
Own
well,
like
for
their
sure.
own like police force that function more like a traditional police, like not like a completely traditional Western police force, but like a traditional like Islam, like their traditional police force and stuff. So like they patrol for
Right.
like the stuff that they would patrol for. Um, and stuff like that, and like indigenous weapons industry, indigenous drone industry, like they just made all their own stuff, like made their own armored cars.
Oil is
You
one
know,
big source of revenue for that
you know
nation
what I mean?
state.
And that's completely different from even like the Taliban, which is like literally took over like in a U.S. colony with like old U.S. equipment, which if you think about it, is like kind of like the oldest like trick in the book. Really, it's like it's a very like
ISIS even
Maoist
had diplomatic
like
relations.
Maoish type stuff to do.
Like they had
But
traditional state diplomatic relations as well. Like you had the oil industry, which kind of propelled ISIS's revenue in the Islamic Caliphate, the Islamic State, right?
yeah,
You had this massive sale of oil to Turkey, for example,
yeah,
right?
like like ISIS had an oil sector. Like think about that. Like had like an oil sector. Like the U.S. had to bomb their oil fields before bombing them.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
true.
like in like a normal country. So like that's the
Yeah.
scary thing. And then there's a lot of people that like, come back, like, people are like, oh, they come back from ISIS, they come back from it's like, okay, like literally from that person's perspective, they were in one country and now they're in another.
Yeah.
So like that mindset is like it is like, it's like it definitely like people say it's an issue, but like it's definitely like one of those things that like it's just literally not being talked about properly. Like the information is not being properly
Absolutely.
conveyed. People are still
Absolutely.
looking at it as if it's like, oh, like ISIS is like Al Qaeda, like literally not Al Qaeda. Like Al Qaeda never even had those goals.
Yeah.
Like Al Qaeda's whole thing was like end the U.S. imperialism in the Middle East. That's it. Like no plans on setting up a country, no plans on telling people or women or anyone what to do after.
Al-Qaeda's
Just
model
like
definitely
good old
true.
fashioned guerrilla, like Viet Cong style, like not necessarily Viet Cong, but like just like good old like fashioned like guerrilla warfare type stuff, basically. Like no, not even really any goals in setting up a state afterwards.
Absolutely.
And I think that like people, the average person is like unfortunately kind of left out, like and kind of like left behind on the information of that, because if people looked at like, especially if people like in Europe, like when they were doing their terror attacks and really terrorizing people there, if they like looked at that as like one country attacking another country, which is how they looked at it. It's like, what are we gonna do from as ISIS, like paratroop people into Belgium? Like, no. Theoretically, they actually could, because I don't think like they still have all their World War II flak guns. Like that possibly could be a thing, but you know what I mean. But it's just like
It's
it's just like it wasn't being viewed properly, because I feel like if Belgium, like for instance, like like Molenbeek and Brussels and and France, like Paris and all those like countries that have to like kind of like actually walk around like everyday life. Like when I was in London, like there was a terror attack, like it was a stabbing, but it was still a terror attack because of the way it was done and why it was done. On Stratham Road where my family lives, and everything, and like it's like it's one of those things where it's like if they looked at that as another country invading their country, like the whole dynamic would change, and they probably like that the whole situation might have even been solved sooner, because like they would have just invaded it like a traditional country instead of it being like, oh, but that's ours. It's like, well, that's actually like the Mesopotamian peoples. Like it's like I can't even call it like the Iraqis, because that's like a colonial concept. But
oh
like
yeah,
that land belongs to like the Assyrians and belongs to like the Arabs, I guess, and it belongs to like whoever like I'm not whoever. So it's
Daesh's power was insane. Like particularly around that peak of like 2015, like you basically had a nascent air force as well. Like if they were able to develop that air force, they would have been able to do so much shit. Like they would have been able
yeah.
to occupy like large portions of West Asia if they had developed an air force.
Like ISIS with air mobility, the same. Like they don't even have to have even a quarter of the air mobility that like the U.S. or a traditional army has. But literally ISIS with like one DC, like one eight, like DC 130, and like like that would be in like a capable pilot, which
Yeah,
isn't really that hard to train, like for especially for planes that big. It's like that would have like basically ended like a lot of that war, and like on their side and in their favor. Like we'd still probably have to like deal with like we'd actually probably have to like actually come to terms with like ISIS like just
oh yeah,
at least occupying Mosul.
sovereignty. Yeah,
But
like
but then the funny thing too is like if they do that, then we have like our modern fighter jets that can shoot that down, blah 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 blah, blah. And it wouldn't. So like, but you're right. If they trained an air force where they had like fighters and bombers, or like not fighters and bombers, but fighters, troop transport and stuff like that, um, then like that would have like totally changed things. Because bombers, like there's like so much in place to shoot down bombers, right? That's like the main job of like a fighter and stuff like that, which almost kind of makes it like an obsolete like thing. But the main thing of like a fighter is to shoot down bombers and to like like and then they had to like eventually develop fighter jets to actually do multi-role things, because like now it's not like so much, because we're not like facing like country to country anymore, and like like a lot of the the people that we do face don't have an air force and stuff like that. It becomes a thing where like now you need like more ground support. You need like to put like more like more in the cannon of like a thing that would only need like maybe 130 rounds. Like more like like bombs on a plane that usually wouldn't have bombs on it, would only have like a couple sidewinder missiles or something like that on it to like do air to air, like a couple like AIM 120s or AIM 130s or whatever. So like like things like that. So it's really yeah, it's really interesting. Like I think like the nature of warfare and like how it's kind of been changing in a way that people haven't noticed, where it's like, okay, like a fighter jet can basically do anything now. It could be a bomber plane, it can be whatever plane,
that's
and stuff like that. But then
far more hybridized in the sense that narratives and propaganda and different economic facets which were not traditionally used in warfare are now becoming used in warfare, right? Like a lot of people have called kind of Belarus's kind of transferring of refugees to the Polish border. A lot of people have called that hybrid warfare, because in a sense it is kind of adding to that sense of warfare, of interstate confrontation and war in
yeah,
a sense. And yeah, like a lot of powers can are definitely using all these different modes that were not traditionally used as modes of warfare in the past, particularly prior to the Cold War era. It's definitely changing rapidly, right? And it's definitely far more technology focused. People want norms to spread rapidly. People want propaganda to spread rapidly. And on top of that, you have the introduction of drones, right? Kind of this mass introduction of drones into kind of the whole warfare spectrum. And yeah, man. But speaking of ISIS and Daesh and Syria, anyway, shout out to my homies in IFB, International Freedom Battalion.
hey,
Those are the boys right there. and the girls and the women. You feel me? IFB right there, International Freedom Battalion. Those are the people. Those are the people right there. Those are holding it down over in Syria and Rojava. They've been on the front lines for a while. So props to them for sure.
Shout out YPG Media too. You know,
Shout
sometimes
out,
I made a meme of them. They like my video. I'm like, all right, shout out to the actual YPG. Like, shout out to the actual YPG.
Shout out the entirety of Rojava. Shout out the entirety of the Kurdistan Communities Union.
Yeah.
Shout out every single structure within Rojava. You feel me? Shout out all those motherfuckers.
I know. Yeah, man. Shout out that area, bro. They really be doing like. I mean, I feel like they probably think they're just doing a project for themselves, but they really doing a project for humanity. And
For sure.
they're really doing a lot for everything. Especially standing up to like 3-4 different states. Like if you think about it, like Kurdistan, like they have to face like Turkey, Iraq, Iran. I think not so much Iran. I think Iran is kind of more chill with them, but I don't know.
See, the thing about Iran is it's definitely anti-Kurd, but it does so in a way that's definitely it goes under the radar. You know, they oppress Kurds in a way that's censored and it doesn't make it to the mainstream. You know, and they definitely combat a lot of Kurdish groups, like the PDKI, for example, right? And Rojava is definitely a big example of kind of Iranian state oppression against marginalized peoples. You know, but yeah. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey are definitely the main superpowers, which are blockading the Kurdish economy. Yeah. They're blockading Rojava, and yet, you know, the Rojava economy has been blockaded by all of its neighbors since like 2013.
Yeah.
Yet it's still self-sustaining. It's still a self-sustainable economy. It's run by itself, and nobody is starved. It's phenomenal. Like there hasn't been a single famine in Rojava since 2013, despite being blockaded by all of its neighbors, and it's just insane, you know. Yeah. And it all ties back into horizontal structures and community-driven economics and mutual aid-driven economics, and you know, that's just the wave of the future, really, to combat late-stage capitalism at its core. You know, it's to combat it with communalism, late-stage capitalism. To combat it with community-driven structures, horizontal structures, and you see that definitely in Rojava and Chiapas, first and foremost, you know. But yeah, man, I got like nothing left in the tank, bro. it's been like 2 hours. Damn, we've been like.
Yeah, we're talking for 2 hours. Jesus.
Going for 2 hours, bro. Hey, it's been fucking epic, man.
Yeah, for sure, man.
I don't even think okay. Well, I was on one podcast before, but yeah, I should do podcast more often. I don't know. I've been thinking about creating a Renegade podcast, but like, I don't know, just haven't had the time and the energy. I might do like a YouTube type thing.
I think you should, man. I think you should, especially definitely maybe even instead of like writing out your analyses, yeah, just like just make videos and just say it, because like this was really informative, really awesome, and yeah, I'm glad, like really happy to have you on the show, Brendan. And
I appreciate it. Hey, always respect, solidarity forever. You feel me? Long live Away TV. Everybody watching this, if you ain't supporting Away TV already, fucking hit his ass up, follow him. Yeah, support the GoFundMe that I put up too. Support everybody in the community. Mutual aid is what's up. You know, we fight for mutual aid out here. We're not here for clout. We're not here for no profit, no clout. We're not doing it for that. We're doing it for each other. You feel me? It's what the community is about. It's what grassroots journalism is about. We're doing it for humanity.
Sure.
We're doing it for everybody. We're doing it for everybody at large, humanity at large. We're not just doing it for ourselves, you know?
Yeah, man. We ain't doing this shit for your grandma.
Yeah,
we're doing this shit for the big picture. You already know, man.
Yeah. We ain't doing this for no boomer. We ain't doing no boomers out here, bro.
Oh my gosh. You already know, bro. Yo, thank you. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Hey, I can't wait to hop on another one sometime soon for sure.
Yeah, man.
Hey, have a great day for sure. Hey, peace. Everybody go follow Away TV.
Yes, sir. Yo, everybody follow Renegade Journal. Thank you so much. You know, I don't know what time it is like there in California, but like, you know, yeah, you're the best. All right. Love you, man. Bye.
I love you. Peace.
Peace.